targeted doctors at Brigham and Women's saying that they were killing white people. As much as we want to proclaim that, these cowards aren't representative of Boston, many of them do, in fact, hail from out of state, with their growing presence, does this change your view of our city? How unsettling is it to have them march freely in the city? What's your reaction to the whole thing, and did we do enough, whoever we is, to counter these people? Give us a buzz or text us at 877-301-8970. You can also tweet us at BOS Public Radio. The word I just used, it really is unbelievably unsettling, because we like to think that this is a different kind of place. It's not Akron, where a black guy unarmed is getting shot 60 plus times by the police. It's not Charlottesville. But this has happened a lot here, which can't be denied anymore,
Well, it could be a reflection of the fact that this is another place where a lot of these values, welcoming otherness and it's support
true.
for the wider community is so embraced. But I agree. I mean, I was actually out of town this weekend, so I wasn't present for it. But yeah, to be here for 4th of July weekend, whether it's your own city or you're from out of town, and watching these people march to the beat of a snare drum, basically sucking the air out of the room, about 100 people, as they're marching along the Freedom Trail, bringing their message. And I don't know what we can read from this, but people who did follow them saw various license plates, some from Texas, but some also from here in Massachusetts.
And so the question is, do we give them too much oxygen? It's one of those issues where some people say, why do you cover this at all? Why do you talk about this at all? It gives it life. And in fairness, on one level, there were 100 people, give or take a few, that came out of Malden and took the subway to town. There were something like 20 at Brigham and Women's, something like 20 at the St. Patrick's Day parade in South Boston. So should we be talking about 140 people? But then you read the story in the Globe this morning about meetings that Mayor Wu is having with leaders, including Rachel Rollins, the U.S. Attorney. And how many times did the Anti-Defamation League say the Patriot Front has had some presence here in the since 2017, I think they talked about?
Well, there have been 600 incidents, and this group is responsible for about 82% of what we're seeing happening across the country. Jim, I have the same debate myself. When you look at these events happening, do we give them too much coverage? And I think we've really looked at this with mass shootings, too. What message do you send when you essentially pay attention, but this is what's happening now? And there are other groups, there are other groups of color who stepped up and said, why didn't more happen? So, obviously it disrupts everything to be in your own city or hometown to see that this is able to happen, that we can't ignore this. And where there's a small group, it obviously represents a much larger group.
I agree with that. And I also think that more attention actually has greater potential to produce change than silence. I think as modest as the gun safety legislation that Biden just signed was in the grand scheme of things, one, it's the first advance in 20 plus years. And I would argue, had the press not relentlessly focused its lens on Buffalo and Uvalde, that probably that wouldn't have happened either. And so my guess is when something like this is happening here, even if it's not on the scale of Charlottesville as one example, that we have an obligation. There's also some value, I think, in talking about this.
Which, by the way, we obviously understand how dramatic Charlottesville is and was, and this is a splinter group off of the group that was responsible there. So we know what the DNA of these people in this group is.
877-301-8970. We're talking about the Patriot Front presence over the last couple of days, 100 of them getting on the subway in Malden, coming to Boston, marching along the Freedom Trail, masked. And, by the way, I know it's become in vogue to say what cowards they are, and it almost sounds like pap. They are cowards. I mean, if it turns out that you want to make a statement, then make a statement with your face, so your face can. And by the way, I'm proud of my hometown of Philadelphia. I don't know what the circumstances were here. I don't know how many real people with decent souls actually were aware of this march. The city was empty for a decent part of the weekend. In Philadelphia, the Patriot Front was there, I think, on July 4th itself. And I'm not advocating violence, so don't get excited here. A bunch of people kicked the crap out of them and scared the hell out of them. And you want at least some response, even though obviously I assume most of us don't want violence. Let's start with Mark in a truck somewhere in Brookline. You're on Boston Public Radio with me and Jared Bowen. Hey.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, hi, Jim.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm at the golf course here in Brookline where the U.S. Open just
glad.
was. And
Play a couple of
just
rounds for
assembled.
me, even though I don't know how to play. But go ahead. What's
no,
up,
no,
Mark?
No, I'm
know,
in my
I'm
dump
kidding,
truck. We're
I'm
disassembling for the setup.
Okay.
So I just, when I heard you chatting, it brought back memories of, I believe it was 2017, the year of Charlottesville, and when the white supremacists came to Boston. Do you remember what happened to them when they tried to assemble on the Common?
Well, all I remember is I think Commissioner Evans was then the boss, and didn't the police create a perimeter around them so that they were the very few demonstrators? I mean, those supporting what happened in Charlottesville were essentially isolated but small. Is my recollection right, Mark, or not?
Yeah. Oh well. The police had to protect them like that. But what I remember being there, they were outnumbered maybe 100 to 1, 200 to 1, 500 to 1, and it got a little rowdy when the police had to take them out of there finally the little arrest wagon thing that they use and stuff, and then the protesters hit the street and chasing the street, and like happens, I guess some of my fellow protesters were being stupid and violent and harassing the cops and even attacking the cops and stuff. But
because they were concerned. If I remember correctly, the counter protesters were concerned that they weren't able to be closer to the Charlottesville sympathetic crowd. I think that was the case. Hey, Mark, steal me an ashtray from the country club. Thanks so much for your call. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970. Jen from Wellesley texts, I'm horrified and I feel that we need more information on them, but also if Michelle Wu wants to tell us what she needs us to do, even though I'm not from Boston, I'll go, I'll stay, and I'll hold a sign. This needs to stop. It does need to stop. 877-301-8970.
Well, as we just heard in the newscast, too, obviously officials are taking this seriously enough now to recognize that there is an issue here. And at some point today, early today, I think we understand, Mayor Wu will be meeting with officials, including U.S. Attorney Rachel Rollins, to start to process what's happening and what we're doing going forward. And they'll speak to the media later today.
Listen to this text. My husband's grandmother and grandfather escaped Vienna on the transport prior to the Holocaust. Austria is offering citizenship to the descendants of stateless Jews who lived in Austria pre-World War I. My husband and daughter are in the process of getting citizenship, and we're exploring options. It is not lost on me that it is safer there for us now. And the person says because of guns, healthcare, all those kinds of things. It is a pathetic state of affairs. Let's go to Pablo. You're in Quincy. You're on Boston Public Radio. Hey, Pablo.
Hi, Pablo.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks for calling.
So I'm calling you guys because, it's concerning the situation we are seeing in some streets here in Quincy. So, for instance, last Friday, when I came home, I saw small little rectangular flyers everywhere, and all these flyers were basically recruiting people for a supremacist group. They were threatening immigrants. They were threatening black people.
Really?
Everything. Yeah, I had the flyers and everything. What I did was I walked the whole block and I picked them up, and I have all of them in a small plastic bag. And I spoke with some of my neighbors, and we are concerned because our block, for instance, is so diverse. Here you can see Caucasian, Latinos, people from Middle East. Our neighborhood is beautiful, and every single day you see kids here that go to school white, all the colors, all the flavors. And it's concerning because what happened with my wife, what happened with the kids, is somebody on one of these ill people or one of these Nazis, they decided to do something against them.
Hey, Pablo,
What I
could
wanna
you do us a favor if you don't mind? Could you take a picture of one of the flyers and email it to us at bpr@wgbh.org? Is that possible?
Of course I will.
Please, that. Again, bpr@wgbh.org. We really appreciate that information, and stay safe. And I think you did a great thing. Pablo, thank you very much for the call. I didn't know about that.
I did not. I'm eager to know more about what the messaging is, because we know the banner that the Patriot Front was marching with said "Reclaim America," which of course represents.
You know, the other thing that we haven't gotten this morning, but you hear a lot on talk radio, maybe we'll hear it too. This is not who Boston is, so don't overplay it. You know, one town over is Everett. And I think it's pretty hard to deny that grotesque racism has infected the infrastructure of the government over there. That city councilor who used the N-word was ultimately forced to resign, but protected early on by the mayor. I think it's his cousin or something. Remember what Gurley Adrian, who was a city councilor there, ran for mayor unsuccessfully, talked about how she was treated. So this notion that we're somehow special and immune to this is not really, I mean, on one hand, you say we have a person of color as the mayor of the city who has appointed people of color to the highest ranks in ways that Boston has never seen. And that is totally true. The city council more diverse than it has ever been. But there are pockets of not just demonstrators, but people in positions of power who subscribe to this kind of crap and practice this crap. So, you know, don't say these are aberrations, because they're not, frankly. 877-301-8970.
Let's go next on the line is Jen from Wellesley. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Jen, welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm actually the text you read a few minutes
great.
ago.
Good.
And
Glad you
I
called.
had to call in
Good.
as you kept talking, because I don't think this situation is like the school shooting, not mentioning the shooter's name. I think we need to put so much heat and light on this. And I'm white, but I have a black daughter. And I think a lot of times white people don't think that, you know, kind of they have a dog in the game, per se, when their lives get busy and racism rises its ugly head. But as Pedro just achingly talked about from Quincy, I mean, these people will hate everyone. So I think we need to talk and educate and communicate to stop this, because it is here. I'm sorry to say, I see it a lot.
Jen, I'm really glad you texted and called. Thanks for your perspective. We appreciate it. 877-301-8970.
Well, I think that's why I won't speak for you, but I think that's why we're all in this job, is to err on the side of awareness and, exactly, shed more light so we have more understanding. Because, again, this is chilling, even if you didn't experience it firsthand, but you understand the nature of what just happened in this city. And I'm sure they're leveraging the hate that they know exists under the seams, but also, of course, countering the fact that Massachusetts was immediately out front, even before the Supreme Court ruling about how it would counter the actions that came down. Obviously, we know the history here, issuing same-sex marriage rights and that ruling. So there's a lot that they have to address.
877-301-8970 is our phone number, and we're obviously talking about this Patriot Front march on the weekend, which unfortunately is not the only one.
Well, coming up, we'll take more of your calls and your texts. You are listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Have you seen this?
The story of Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman,
It's on the GBH News YouTube channel.
the first African-American woman to win a freedom suit.
This is in the 1700s.
It was 1781.
When we talk about her being one of the first women in Massachusetts to own property, that is significant.
History has always been transformed through the actions of Black women.
Why is it we don't know this story?
YouTube.com/GBH News.
Support for our programs comes from you and the Worcester Art Museum, presenting Jewels of the Nile, where you can experience ancient Egypt in brilliant color through 300 pieces of jewelry displayed for the first time, now on view. More at worcesterart.org. And the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, providing resources and tools to help you navigate the college planning process. including customized plans of savings, loans, and guidance. More information at mefa.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Jared Bones sitting in for Marjorie, who's on vacation for a couple of days. We are live at the Boston Public Library. And if you're just tuning in, we're talking about the Patriot Front's march through Boston over the weekend and repeated presence by white supremacists here in Massachusetts. You can call us or text us at 877-301-8970. You know, I just realized when you mentioned Rachel Rollins, I thought about it. Last time, U.S. Attorney, she was on with me on television. We were talking about racism in Massachusetts. She was making the point again, don't think that this is an alien notion here. I totally forgot about it. She had just charged, I think this is in April or May, for the second time in a handful of years, somebody for arson relating to a black church in Springfield. And the most recent, I think the first instance was either when Obama was inaugurated or elected. It was the night of one of those things. This most recent was just a couple of years ago. I think it was 2020, 2021, and the guy was indicted in 2022. Burning of a black church in Springfield, Massachusetts in the 21st century. I mean, it is really stunning. I mean, it's really stunning.
Well, obviously, the aim here, among other things, is to sow fear. So to burn a black church, to line up and go to a hospital where doctors are trying to create equity in health care.
Philip Martin, by the way, did brilliant reporting, we should mention, on the Brigham and Women's thing. It was unbelievable, and I think was the first in there, too. But go ahead.
And then, to show up at the St. Patrick's Day parade. And then what we saw here over the weekend. And by the way, there's an allegation of a black man that they assaulted on the corner, one of the corners just around the corner from here, from the Boston Public Library. So this is about fear, especially so we can certainly argue that it's cowardly that they'll be wearing these masks so that they can't be identified. But there's also an element of fear when you see 100 people walking down the street in a uniform to a snare drum with masks.
And beyond just the marchers, I mean, Pablo said there were tons of flyers out in Quincy recruiting people to come to this thing. Could one of you guys check the email to see if you happen to send that? And if you did, we'd love to see it. 877-301-8970. Where do you want to go?
Let's go to Tammy calling from New Hampshire. Hi, Tammy.
Welcome, Tammy. Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Hey, I'm not a constitutional scholar, and I agree.
Well, you're
with
talking
the
to two constitutional scholars, so this is perfect. You called the right place.
Thank
Go ahead.
Okay. Who was the justice years ago who said he couldn't define
obscenity,
pornography, but he knew it when he saw it?
Potter Stewart.
Okay. Why can't we craft some kind of law that prohibits people like the Nazis? I mean, I know it's a slippery slope once you get on there. Who are you going to prohibit next? But the pornography, the violence, the racial, it's so destructive to our country.
You know, Tammy, the frustration in your voice is one that I think virtually everybody listening, and I speak for myself here, shares. But the flip side is, I am surely no constitutional law expert, but if they're peaceful, they can do it. I mean, and they can even, while you have to keep moving, my understanding is if you want to hold a rally, you need to get some sort of a permit. But I don't think a permit can be denied racists, unfortunately, because of what you said, not only the First Amendment, but the slippery slope thing. How do you define who you don't want to give access to the public to, Tammy, assuming they're not violent? If they're violent, obviously, that they can't play that game. How do you do that?
That's my question, because I don't want either group on either side making that rule. You know, oh, now we hate Democrats or Republicans or whatever. You know, it would have to be something crafted very, very specifically.
Well, I don't think you can. And next time we have a constitutional law expert on, I promise you we will broach the question. So stay tuned. But I totally get your frustration. You know, thanks for the call. You do sure to shake your head and say, how are they allowed to do this in our city? But, you know, the infamous Skokies the Nazis marching in Skokie decades ago is always picking the example. The ACLU is criticized for it. The ACLU did the right thing. They're entitled to speak.
Well, I'm pretty certain that I did see something that a group doing what they did should have had a protest permit, but none was applied for. And so, of course, I think this is one of the things that the authorities, again, Mayor Wu, Rachel Rollins, that they'll be
if you're
talking-
walking and you're not blocking anything, you need a permit?
I saw it over the weekend.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Or
Okay.
at least the police, I think, had identified that there was no permit for which they applied.
And I assume you don't apply for a permit because that makes it less likely there'll be a counter demonstration, right?
Unless, this is obviously a PR grab in addition to everything else, and you do that to draw attention to what you're doing, and they certainly got a lot of attention from the incident we were talking about earlier from a few years ago on Boston Common.
When I first heard about this, while intellectually I get it, and intellectually I know we're not immune, but I also kept saying to myself throughout that day, I can't believe this is happening here. And it's sort of like I'm having so many of these, I can't believe this is happening here. I can't tell you how many times since the abortion ruling came down. It was a week ago Friday. I think it was a week ago Friday. So it was 10, 11 days ago. I can't tell you how many times in the middle of a day I've just had a moment where I said, I can't believe this. We're going to talk to Lee Pelton about what he and the Boston Foundation are doing later. Should we read this? I know this is off topic, but not really. Should we read the story? It's as troubling as it is in whatever is going on in the 26 plus states. Did you see a number of legislators are talking about whether or not they can bar women from crossing state borders to go to another state to get a legal, it is just...
Well, it's like bounty hunters.
In this country. It's just unbelievable.
I'm surprised that you say that you can't believe it, because I was in New York when this happened. I was traveling with friends from Boston, and when we met up a little bit later in the day, my reaction was, did you see this? And it's more of resignation. Not that I can't believe it, but more of resignation that this is our new normal now. And it has been for the last few years.
Well, look at the days in a row. Guns, abortion, environmental protection, religion. This was like a grand slam for the Supreme Court. Again, a totally anti-majoritarian Supreme Court. In any case, Beth, you're in Boston. You're on Boston Public Radio. Thank you for calling. Hi.
Hi. I just was listening to what you said to the last caller.
Yeah.
And the thing is, in other countries, like in Germany, you absolutely cannot just go out and preach hatred through Nazism or certain fascist regimes because of their history. And if I did a little digging on Saturday after this nonsense happened, and if you look at their website, they call for things like raping women, as a punishment for not being traditional. And when somebody preaches violence on their website, I just think that we're at a point where we have to have a carve-out to stop these people from recruiting. If you do any follow-up on what they're doing, it's all hate and violence. That's all I really wanted to say.
Well, Beth, thank you for your call. Obviously, the major difference, I haven't done the research you've done, so my apologies. The major difference between what Germany did post-World War II vis-a-vis Nazism and what we do is we have a First Amendment. It's sort of like we praise all these countries that have banned weaponry like they did after that was at Port Arthur in Australia. I always forget where the conservative prime minister basically went out and they passed legislation that allowed them to pull in all assault weapons. Again, there's no Second Amendment there. A lot of the protections that are most important to this country, the First Amendment being at the top of the list, also preclude us from doing things that emotionally I think a lot of us would like done. 877-301-8970 is our phone number. We're talking about the your reaction to the Patriot Front and other similar sorts of things happening right here in Boston.
And I should say, my reaction was resignation, not resignation that we're just going to lay down and allow this to happen.
But this is what America is.
This is what America is. So let's go to Molly in West Newbury. Hi, Molly.
Hello, Molly.
Hi. I'm not sure if it was spoken earlier, but Michael Che was ridiculed for saying it. That he said that Boston is one of the racist cities he's ever been to.
He said it was the most racist city. Yeah.
Oh, I give him. I was being the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I don't know why this is a surprise to anybody that there's ugly everywhere, and we surely have it in our backyard.
Well, you know what I would, Michael Che from SNL, for those who don't recall that moment, I would argue, while there are examples, horrible examples of racism in our city, and again, one city over, I would argue voters have suggested that their inclusion and tolerance and diversity is what they care about. You know, Michelle Wu is the first non-white guy ever to be mayor. She's one of the few people who's taken a position like this who doesn't say things like, well, I'd hire people of color for top positions if they were qualified people. She's filled her ranks. So there's a lot of racism going on. I, for one, Molly, think that Che's criticism was a little overblown, that we're making strides here, but doesn't keep people like the Patriot Front out. But thank you for your perspective. I appreciate it. 877-301-8970 is our phone number.
And at least there's a lot, I would say there's a lot of conversation to address this now too. I think we're much more open than we ever have been about all of the ills that we have in this city in terms of inequity. And I think there is, I don't think I'm ridiculously optimistic, but I think there is a move to address this.
Yeah, and by the way, both things can exist. You know, Molly, Che
and it makes
can
sense
be right.
that they
There's a
both
ton of
exist.
racism here, right? Yeah. At the same time that there's at least an attempt, I think a serious attempt, to struggle with it. 877-301-8970. You know, also, remember the survey and when the Boston Globe did their series on racism in Boston? Was that 2017? I can't remember. They polled African Americans across the country and asked, of 8 major American cities, what was the least welcoming? Again, 2017. The least welcoming by far of the 8 was Boston. And Philip did a piece just last year. Philip Martin, the same Philip Martin, talked about African Americans moving to places like Atlanta because much more recently than 2017, they didn't feel comfortable and welcomed in this city. Susan in Providence, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, I'm a long-time listener and a first-time caller.
Thank you for both.
Sure. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks.
I just have been thinking about what you're talking about today, and I try to listen a lot of days, even though I work full-time. We won't go into that.
No, we can, but that's okay. We're going to do that at the end of the show, actually,
Yes,
so stay tuned. Go ahead.
The thing is that as a sociologist for 50 years, I've been reading, and I'm not a young person. I've been studying inequality and violence and the intertwine of the two. So I know that you're focused on violence on Boston in this particular conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that every day we can pick something, like we could look at the Illinois shooting yesterday. We could look at just about anything. What really concerns me, and I say this in class all the time, and the students are very open to it and they want to learn and everything, but it needs to be said in a broader audience that I don't have, and you all do. What needs to be said is the fact that we want to know who did this, why did they do it, blah, blah, blah. We're thinking about the people, which is good. Thinking about the individual level. As a sociologist, we train to understand structures. Cut me off.
No, keep going.
It's goofy. So in talking about structures, we're talking about the political institution, the economic institution, the educational institution, religion, and so forth. There's 6 major institutions. So you want to understand the structures, which we socially construct, and we make them up. We people decide. For example, we just made a whole bunch of laws, as you pointed out, that are not very helpful to people in general. And, I have very strong feelings about all that. But what concerns me is that all these things happen day after day, and then we want to know who did it, why did they do it. We never say, how are we producing this? When Uvalde happened, Chris Murphy was on the TV a lot, and he was saying, what are we doing? What are we doing? He was in Congress. I remember I was driving home from work, and I was listening to him. I thought, oh, my God, he has the question. But he was saying, what are we doing in Congress? Because we're doing nothing. I'm saying from a sociological perspective, and we don't usually get our voices out, our points out, the perspective, we're saying what are we doing that we're setting up a society that does these kinds of things.
Well, Susan, we're short on time, but since you broached the question, you want to give us a quick answer? What are we doing?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that it's not about bad people. It's about a rotten barrel. It's not about rotten apples. It's that the barrel is rotten. We need to look at it, and we need to collectively talk about it and see what works and what doesn't, for whom, not for whom, et cetera. I'm sorry.
We got it.
Windy.
Well, no. I mean, actually, the surprise that comes on my end, we were talking about the surprise element of this earlier. I don't think we necessarily saw this with the January 6th insurrection, but what I do see in a lot of this that always surprises me is how young these participants are. Of course, they were wearing masks over the weekend, so we didn't get to see the identities of the Patriot Front marchers. But they do tend to skew younger, and that always fascinates me. How does this happen when we think that we're becoming, well, we know we're not, but you presume that you're in a society that's becoming more integrated, more evolved every day. But
well, that in answer, Susan, thanks for your first call. That's part of the problem. Part of the problem is replacement theory. Is that a lot of white people are upset that we're on the verge of becoming a minority country, and they don't like that very much. We'll continue this conversation. Susan, thanks for your call. We appreciate it.
All right, well, coming up next, we will speak with NBC Sports Authority Trenni Kusnierek, who is talking about the staying power of older tennis stars like the Williams sisters and Roger Federer. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Next time on The World, a cafe for writers in Tokyo. Come for the coffee, but you can't leave till you've met your deadline.
The customers can choose from a mild, normal, or severe hourly caution.
It's not all harsh. You get candy when you finish your work. Tokyo's anti-procrastination cafe on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for GBH comes from you and the Museum of Printing in Haverhill, preserving the rich history of graphic communication. Now on display, the 1493 Nuremberg Chronicle and the first American math textbooks. museumofprinting.org. And Boston Children's Hospital, ranked the nation's #1 children's hospital by U.S. News & World Report, where families from Massachusetts and the world come for answers. bostonchildrens.org/answers.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jared Bowen sitting in for Marjorie. I'm Jim Browdy, live from the Boston Public Library. Before we introduce our next guest, Pablo, who called from Quincy before, sent us that flyer. Let me just read you a piece. We're a social club of nationalists from New England focused on building a network of like-minded men and women dedicated to defending their lands and their people. Above all, we stand for the security and prosperity of white New Englanders, on and on. So that was the recruitment effort for, at least according to Pablo, for the Patriot Front, and I assume other similar sick organizations. Joining us now, though, is Sports Authority Trenni Kusnierek. That's a hell of a segue, Jim. She's an anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston. Hello, Trenni. How are you?
Hi. Independence Day for certain people only.
Certain people only, right. Exactly.
So, Trenni, Brittany Griner, we're actually seeing her in Russia as her trial begins, and we're just learning of a letter that she wrote to the president to more attention being paid. Why is she still there? How can justice really be meted out here? What's the latest?
I mean, the latest is she's on, and for those of you who are not in person or watching on YouTube, she is on trial in Russia. 99% of cases that go to trial in Russia end up in a conviction.
Trenni's using air quotes, by the way.
I'm using air quotations. If you can't hear the sarcasm in my voice. I mean, it's just a really sad situation. And I think listen, I know everybody wants the Biden administration to do something, and I know her family is asking for help and she is asking for help, but as we know, it is far more complicated than just, making a phone call and saying, hey, you know what, let's just do a quick prisoner swap here, because the prisoner that Russia wants back in return is a very dangerous criminal who has been in a web of international terrorism and I think arms dealing for a long time. So it's not as simple as just getting her out of there. And unfortunately, she's being used as a political pawn on the part of Russia right now. And it's heartbreaking because, to be quite honest, I'm not smart enough. I don't know how you negotiate. I would love to actually, and I'm sure you've asked, and maybe you have asked Julia Kayyem about this, but I don't know, how do you negotiate the exchange of essentially hostages and prisoners in the two countries and get her home safely. Because
Well, they're always back channel. People say even when there's the tensest of relations like there is now between Russia and the United States, they're always back channels, say the experts. I don't know what that means either. I know what it means. I don't know what it practically means. But, you know, two things that I took away. One, the sad part of the handwritten letter from Griner to Joe Biden was that she felt the need to say, I voted for you. I voted for the first time in 2020 and I voted for you. That to me, maybe I'm taking it wrong, was sort of...
Well, I think it sounds like a plea, right? Like
It is,
using
but
anything that you possibly can to appeal to his humanity.
But you shouldn't have to,
But
is
you
my
shouldn't
point.
have to,
And here,
yes.
by the way, let's hear from Brittany Griner's wife, Sherelle Griner. This was on CNN last week.
I don't think the maximum amount of effort is being done because, again, the rhetoric and the actions don't match. You know, when you have a situation where BG can call our government, the embassy, 11 times, and that phone call don't get answered, you don't have my trust at that point until I see actions that are in BG's best interest. It would have been in her best interest for her phone call to have been answered. It would be in her best interest for her to be back on U.S. soil.
You know, you say I'm not an expert. Let me just say on steroids, I'm not an expert. However, a guy who is an expert, Jason Rezaian, was on with me right after Griner was taken. Of course, he was in captivity in Iran for 500 days, or as a Washington Post columnist who was obviously taken by the Iranians. His criticism of the United States head on was this low profile thing he said is exactly the wrong way to go. It loses time. You don't make points. Now, again, he's not an international diplomat, but I would say he knows hostage taking as well as anybody in our country. And a lot of people share that we made a mistake early on by downplaying this and attempting to work back channels rather than doing something high profile. But this, I have to say, the letter itself,
it's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking.
It's
really heartbreaking.
You can just see in the way that she walks into the courtroom when you see the video or the pictures. Like, I can't even imagine what it's like to be, you know, in a prison in Russia and have no idea when you can get home again, and just how that like rips your soul from you. I mean, she looks so vacant in her eyes
really
and so
did,
defeated. And, you know, again, we talked about it on the show before. You obviously worry about her personal safety there. And then thus far, it seems like she has been treated as well as a prisoner possibly can be. But as a black gay female in Russia, I mean, that has to be a layer of extra fear and fear for her family and for her herself.
I watched that CNN interview, and I was really struck by her wife, who it seemed for the first time felt like she had to do a well-being check. It is interesting that they're able to be in pretty constant contact, it seems, and she called her to say, are you okay? Because you do not look okay to me. And she said that she was just completely overwhelmed, and apparently she's traveling 5 hours, all cramped up, as her wife described it, basically in a cage just to get
to the court?
To get
I
into
didn't know
court.
that.
Yeah, so horrible circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and again, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know if the solution is, you know, the NBA putting more pressure on Russia. I don't know if it's the Biden administration. I don't know if it is a high-ranking senator or congressperson, like someone coming out. I mean, you know, admittedly, I have no idea, but the only thing I do know for sure is that it is a situation that is, because, listen, could it happen to any of us? Sure, but it's certainly much more likely to happen to someone that the Russian government knows holds some public significance.
Of course, a celebrity.
You know, it's a celebrity.
You know,
in the United
I don't know if
States.
this is helpful, but let's do it anyway for 90 seconds. Is Chris Gasper wrote a piece in the Globe saying that part of the problem is one of the reasons people say, why is she playing in Russia to begin with? Because a lot of these athletes make much more playing overseas than they do playing in the WNBA. And he makes the point that some individual contracts for one player in the NBA are often equal to the total payroll of a bunch of teams. What did Griner make? $1 million plus, which is the minimum salary, I think, for the worst player in the NBA. His view is if you value the WNBA, the progressive NBA should subsidize the league more.
Chris, I've always sort of been on the, like, listen, fair or unfair, the WNBA does not make the money of the NBA. But the one place where Chris Gasper has me sort of moving to the other side a little bit is he's not asking NBA players to do what the U.S. men's national team and U.S. women's national team did in soccer, which has sort of come to an agreement on a contract for both of them.
Equalize the pot,
that
right?
equalizes the pot.
Yeah.
He is saying, and this is right, and I never, to his credit, I never thought about it this way. The WNBA is owned by the NBA, so it is a financial investment by the NBA, and they should be held responsible to invest more money, to take some of that money and put it back into a league that they developed, that they wanted, because they're clearly making some money off of it, and it needs to be reinvested so that these women do have choices. No one's saying that you need to make that your top player needs to make what LeBron James is making or Steph Curry. Like, listen, that's just not how the landscape works, but you could give these women and these teams more money. You might have to take a loss for a little bit, but you could do a much better job of growing and promoting the sport and working to find ways to better monetize it.
Can we move to, I'd say a happier thing. Wimbledon. I don't care who's winning or not winning. I don't want to talk about that. But I want to talk about an issue that has been brought up a lot, is arguably, I think inarguably, the greatest women's tennis player ever, Serena Williams, went out twice in the first round last two years. And somebody wrote...
Well, last year she had to retire for injury.
Oh, sorry.
So,
okay. And went out in the first round this year. But, she clearly isn't what she used to be.
Yeah.
Federer isn't what he used to be.
You almost never see him play anymore.
Well, he's hurt. Isn't he hurt
he's
too?
Always, yeah, he's
but he said he's coming back.
Yeah.
But, the point that's made, I'm embarrassed to say, I can't remember who wrote this piece, but I love this.
Chris Cleary. It's Cleary, right?
Whoever it is.
It's from the New York Times.
Okay, so while we used to say, oh, Michael Jordan, don't come back and play. You're going to destroy your legacy. Oh, Tom Brady, don't come back and play. I love the fact that these older players who were among the greatest who ever played their sport are deciding to come back and play. My initial attitude 10 years ago used to be, oh, they can't give it up. How sad. What's the Green Bay Packers quarterback?
Brett Favre.
Brett Favre. You can't give it up, even though he's a shell of his former self. And maybe that's true. But you sort of see some joy in these people saying, I love doing this. I'm not as great as I used to be. Unless I'm Tom Brady, I'm probably not going to win a championship.
Yeah.
But I totally changed my mind about this after reading the Times story.
Yeah, I suppose, too, there's this, and also, did you watch Serena's first round match against Harmony Tam? There was one moment, and she actually played okay. She just sort of wore down. And I would say that Serena Williams might still have an opportunity to win another.
She's 40-something, right?
Isn't she? 40. She'll be 41, I believe, in September.
Okay.
But prior to the hamstring injury, she was making it to the semifinals and finals of Grand Slam events still. And when you watch her, she won the second set 6-love over Harmony Tam.
That.
Her first set, she was up a break and lost, and she was up a break in the final set, in the third set.
I didn't know that either.
And she just kind of wore down and got tired. And there was a shot that she made, and I don't remember if it was in the tie break or towards the end of the regular portion of the match, but she kicked her leg in the air and punched her fist in the air. I mean, she had the fire and the passion that you've always seen from Serena Williams, and it was a fun match to watch. And honestly, I was watching her and thinking, well, this is just someone who hasn't played real competitive tennis in a year because of a hamstring injury. If she continues to play and works her way back and gets her cardiovascular fitness back to where it needs to be, or even 75% of what it needs to be, why can't we see her in the finals of the U.S. Open? She's still, and honestly, I was watching it with someone who's played tennis. I've covered it for the Olympics, but it's still not my best sport in analyzing. And he was saying that the woman she was playing against is actually really difficult to compete against.
What country is she from, the other woman?
She's French. And she, because she serves so slow and she's so not powerful, that when you're as powerful as Serena Williams, she almost has an advantage. Tam does, just because of the way that it works. But it was great. It was a really fun match to watch. And listen, I know Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal aren't in their 40s yet, but it's pretty incredible that when you think of tennis right now, still the two best male players in the world really are two of the oldest and two of the most accomplished. And it's you kind of keep waiting for someone to take it over, and people keep saying, I want new blood. But I'm but why? It's fun to watch Nadal. It's fun, as much as Djokovic drives me insane, it's fun to watch Djokovic.
But I don't even care if they're champions anymore.
Yeah,
I'd rather see Serena Williams play at a level one down than have her not play at all.
I actually watched a doubles match. I loved watching Venus and Jamie Murray.
Can we play sound from this?
Yeah.
Can we play sound from this? This was so great. Venus Williams is playing. Is this Andy Murray's brother?
Yes.
Okay. Andy Murray's a champion. Jamie Murray is his brother, plays mixed doubles with Venus Williams. You're going to hear a question from a reporter, and you
this
assume.
was a jerk question. Is this the question I'm
but
thinking of?
she took it great. Yeah, listen to the question from the reporter, and I think I watched it, and she was smiling how well Venus Williams took it. Here it is.
So are you guys in it to win it, or is it the first target just to get past the third round where Serena and Andy came a cropper?
We're better than them. We're better than them. Come on.
Well, what kind of question is that? Like, we're in it for a stroll. Like, come on.
Are you here for the experience, or are you going to go all the way?
You gonna write a good article or just halfway decent?
I'll do what I usually do.
I love that. And by the way, if you watch it, she's laughing when she's saying it. She's saying, "I'm here to play." I mean, I sort of like that.
It's also a dumb question. Like, what do you think? Like, just because even if you aren't at your peak, if you are still out there competing, you're not just going out there to be like, yeah, I don't know, whatever, I guess.
Well, I come into this now. So let me play the cynic here, because we can also throw Tiger Woods into this. Tom Brady, arguably one of them, is very good. The other we're still seeing. But how much of this is wrapped up in money at the same time, too? Jim says he likes to watch, but there's a whole narrative that's built around, there's a whole myth that's built around so many of these figures, too, and it's about endorsement.
You mean to keep their TB12 alive?
Exactly.
Like
it's about endorsements, and it's about business.
But who cares? I mean, if you enjoy seeing somebody who at least at one time was one of the greatest at what they did, as long as, I'm old enough, which you two are not. I actually saw Willie Mays when he played for the Mets, and a ball was hit to deep, one of the greatest players, five greatest players ever played baseball, and he stumbled. I mean, he was really sad. That was a point beyond which a great player should play. But these people are still really talented. Who cares if they're making a lot?
I'm not saying I care, but I wonder how much of this is driven by those factors.
Maybe it is.
I mean, I'm sure it is, right? Because, let's be honest. If all you've ever done, especially in a sport like tennis, where the Williams sisters this is how they have made money. They didn't go to college like Tom Brady did. Their whole entire existence is wrapped up. Even Tom Brady, his entire existence as an adult has been wrapped up in making money off of a sport. And if you listen, they've all made a ton of money. They can probably live the rest of their lives without ever working, But there also is a factor of, if you love what you do and you like being on the road and you like pushing your product, and it gives you a platform, the Williams sisters have really pushed for diversity and inclusion and women's rights, and a little bit more later in their career. Listen, is it about money? Sure, but for those of us who work in any industry, how many of us is it not about money? Why is a doctor at 72 years old, why is he still practicing medicine? I'm sure part of it is, I make still pretty good money for coming in 3 days a week, And
they actually might like to treat patients, too.
But they also might still like to, but that's the point. They might also still enjoy what they do. So is part of it about, great, I like this and I can still make money? I think if they hated what they were doing, they wouldn't go out. None of them need to do it for the money. That's the point I was getting to, Jim, that maybe that doctor still enjoys interacting with people and the job he's doing, and he just happens to also, or she just happens to also make a lot of money on the
Trenni, is there any sport other than golf where there's a special league for older players? I'm just trying to think. It's called the Seniors Tour or something.
Yeah, not to make money. I don't think there is a senior PGA Tour.
But there's not senior tennis or senior anything else.
Not that I can think of. I mean, there certainly isn't senior Major League Baseball or senior NFL.
That's a very good untapped market right there.
Yeah. That is
there are
huge.
a lot of us that would be very happy to see that.
I think part of it is that golf, to be quite honest, no offense to all the golfers out there, but
you don't need to be that.
You don't, right? You don't need to be sliding left and right and hitting great come to the net drop shots. You can still golf when you're 75, 80 years old.
That's a very good point. Actually.
And still golf fairly. You might not drive it as far, but your short game probably isn't all that affected by age.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left. Can we go back to a topic Margie and I discussed with you last week, which really aggravates me as opposed to the Wimbledon thing, which makes me smile? After 3 selfish, pathetic players called out by Dan Shaughnessy in the Globe, Houck, is that how you say his name, the reliever?
Houck.
Duran, is that how you say the center fielder's name? And Chris Sale, we all know, decided.
And don't forget Cutter Crawford. Everybody forgets Cutter Crawford.
Wait, he's not vaccinated either?
Nope.
Okay, so they don't go to Canada, and at least one of the games that the Red Sox lost, they probably would not have lost if this great reliever Houck had been there. After the thing, the manager, who I really have great affection for. I've never met him, by the way.
He's
but I really
great. I
like
love
him.
Alex Cora. I think
Seems
he's
to be a
awesome.
really honest and direct and decent guy. Obviously, he was not so honest when he was with Houston, and he broke the rules, but he's apologized profusely for that. He says, don't worry, before we go back in September to Toronto, and by the way, Canada requires you be vaccinated. That was the underlying point I forgot to make. More are going to be vaccinated. What's going on? Do you know what the backstory is? What's going on here?
Well, we know now that Jaron Duran has said he will get vaccinated.
He's a rookie, right?
He's yes.
Or close.
Yes. He's kind of come back and forth. He's been on sort of the shuttle back and forth between AAA. Tanner Houck still holding out, and Chris Sale. I went off on Chris Sale the other night on my show. I just was so irritated. So he had actually a pretty good rehab outing. Now, for those of you who don't know, they signed Chris Sale. Red Sox never should have signed him to the contract that they did. It was after they won the World Series in 2018, and like his arm was, everybody knew that his arm was like hanging by a string, and then they got and they give him this huge deal, and then he blows out his arm, and he hasn't really pitched all that continuously or successfully since. He's been on the shelf a lot, and every time he gets in front of a camera about his injury, it's, it kills me to not be out there with my team, and I just feel like I'm such a waste of money, and I'm just sitting here, and I can't do anything, and I can't help my team. I just want, I'm a team guy. I want to help my team. And then that jerk is asked about getting vaccinated for late in the season, and he gets mad that someone asks him the question, even though it comes a day after Alex Cora says this, and that's the preamble to the question. And he's like, can't we just focus on how much fun I was having out there in the minors, that bleep and this? And I was like, no, we can't. Because little Mr. I want to do everything for the team. You won't do everything for the team. Like you sneeze and you get hurt, and then you won't get vaccinated. Like do something that actually helps your team, you selfish jerk.
He's only making $30 million a year.
$30 million to sit around. I would take $1 million to sit around.
You probably made this point. We only have 30 seconds. If an individual player, like a tennis player, like Djokovic, chooses to do this, I don't give a damn. He suffers. This is a
team thing.
I mean, it's really gross. Yeah. I'm glad you called him out. Nice to see you, Trenni.
Bye, guys. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Be well.
We have been speaking with Trenni Kusnierek. She's an anchor and reporter for NBC Sports Boston. Coming up, Boston used to be ambitious and historic leader for mass transit and other public infrastructure. Can we get back to that innovation to solve some of the most intractable problems? Boston Globe staff writer David Scharfenberg joins us to discuss his latest series on all the ways Boston could lead once more. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
I'm Frank Oglesby, voice of the T. The doors are opening for Smart Conversation with Jim Braude and Marjorie Egan on Boston Public Radio. Local perspective, local voices. Welcome aboard, Boston's local NPR.
Funding for our programs comes from you and the Boston Public Market in downtown Boston, offering fresh, regionally sourced food, prepared meals, and specialty items from 30 local farmers and artisans. This message funded by the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism. Explore landscapes across the United States and how they shape the way Americans work, play, and interact. America Outdoors with Baratunde Thurston premieres tonight at 9 on GBH2.
I'm City Hall reporter Soraya Wintersmith, and you and I are listening to 89.7 WGBH. WGBH HD1 Boston, online at WGBHnews.org. Boston's local NPR.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. No charges filed yet in connection with yesterday's mass shooting at a 4th of July celebration in Illinois' Highland Park, but police have custody of the person they believe was the gunman who perched himself on a rooftop overlooking a parade and used a high-powered rifle to spray the crowds below with bullets. At least 6 people died, many more were injured. And with that, Highland Park becomes one of the latest places in a growing list of American cities to mourn deep losses caused by a mass shooter. NPR's Cheryl Corley has more.
Authorities are questioning 21-year-old Robert Cremo III after police arrested him following a brief car chase. The shooting was one of the latest to shadow the rituals of American life, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker said he was angry.
While we celebrate the 4th of July just once a year, mass shootings have become our weekly, yes, weekly, American tradition.
Highland Park's mayor says the community was terrorized by this act of violence. Both Governor Pritzker and President Biden say they'll provide resources to help the community. Cheryl Corley, NPR News.
Tomorrow, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken embarks on a trip to Indonesia. He's headed to the G20 meeting. His Russian and Chinese counterparts are expected to be in attendance as well. NPR's Michelle Kellerman has more.
The State Department says Blinken will meet with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the G20 gathering in Bali. The meeting comes as the Biden administration considers lifting tariffs on China to ease inflation at home. The U.S. is also encouraging China not to aid Russia's war in Ukraine. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will also be at that G20 gathering, but there are no plans for Blinken to meet him. The State Department says Blinken will reinforce the U.S. commitment to work with international partners on global challenges, from food and energy insecurity to the war in Ukraine. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
President Biden has presented the Medal of Honor to 4 Army soldiers for their heroism in Vietnam.
For each of those 246 years, American patriots have answered our nation's call to military service. They stood in the way of danger, risked everything, literally everything, to defend our nation and our values.
Today's recipients include retired Specialist Dwight Birdwell, who took enemy fire to his face and torso, but still managed to get his commander to safety and disrupt the enemy assault. He's the first Native American to receive the medal for service in any conflict since 1973. On Wall Street, the Dow is down now more than 600 points, nearly 2%. This is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro in Brookline. Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey has announced that her office is awarding more than $262,000 in grant funding to 70 organizations across the state that'll fund summer jobs for young people that are focused on promoting health and wellness. This is the 8th year that the Attorney General's office is running the Healthy Summer Youth Jobs Grant Program, which enables teens and young people to have a direct impact in their communities by working in jobs that promote good nutrition, healthy living, and professional development. The grant program is funded with labor-related settlement money from the AG's office. And a former mayor of Fall River is getting into the marijuana business. No, it's not Jazel Correa. He tried that. He's serving a sentence in New Hampshire jail for extorting marijuana businesses. Will Flanagan will hold a grand opening of the Cosmopolitan Dispensary on Thursday at the site of the former Salter School in Fall River. Flanagan told the Herald News during a recent tour of the 3-story building that he wanted to give it a hip and fun setting. Cosmopolitan will sell recreational marijuana, and Flanagan plans to eventually manufacture and produce products on the top floors as well. In sports, the Red Sox-Rays back at it at Fenway tonight. First pitch is at 7:10. A little cloudy out there right now, high about 85 degrees before the day is over. Cloudy and upper 60s overnight. Sun clouds mid-80s tomorrow, mostly cloudy and 80 on Thursday. It is 78 degrees in Boston. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include DuckDuckGo, a privacy company committed to making privacy online simple. Used by tens of millions, they offer private search and tracker blocking with one download. DuckDuckGo, privacy simplified.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. I'm Jim Browdy. Marjorie Egan is off. Jared Bowen, Executive Arts Editor here at GBH, is sitting in for. Hello, Jared.
Hello again, Jim.
So in a new series for The Globe, writer David Scharfenberg argues Boston used to have ambition and calls for the city to reclaim its status as a leader on some of the toughest issues: climate, housing, transit, education. David joins us now to discuss all the ways Boston could and maybe should lead once again. David Scharfenberg, great to talk to you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So if you could just walk us through how we reclaim this greatness that we once had, and where did we have greatness in particular that you think can be recaptured here?
Yeah, so we have a pretty amazing history, actually, if you think about it. I mean, we got rid of a tyrannical king years ago. We're credited with inventing public education here. We built the nation's first subway. And, you know, the Big Dig is like the most iconic mega project in modern American history. And we tend to focus on some of the downsides here, you know, occasional criminal indictment, a few cost overruns here and there. But it is pretty amazing, actually, what that thing wrought. I mean, you just walk down the Rose Kennedy Greenway, you see the beautiful, you know, fountains and the beer garden there, one of my favorites.
Public art. We have to mention the public art.
Absolutely, can't forget that. And it really unlocked the seaport, which, despite all its flaws, is, you know, an economic behemoth by any measure. So we have done a lot of pretty incredible things, actually. We've gotten a little gun shy, you know, understandably, after some of the problems with the Big Dig. But the timing, I would argue, is just terrible. I mean, we've got some pretty existential problems facing us now. The housing costs are just insane. The T is failing us in a lot of ways, occasionally killing us, you know, in the worst cases. The climate threat is real. I mean, we are one of the most vulnerable to rising seas in the whole world, and our education system is in real trouble. And now is when we really need this kind of ambition, and we've grown a bit timid. So this is a bit of a call to arms here. Let's start thinking bigger and see what we can do.
Can we talk about our timidity? Is timidity a word? I think it is.
Yep.
Timidity
Sure.
for a second before, and then we're going to go area by area because you had some really creative, thoughtful ideas. You know, the critical issue is, why did we stop, David Scharfenberg, after the Big Dig? And I don't think it's some Zen answer. It's not. I don't think it's because of an absence of leadership. We became unambitious. I don't even think it's because of all the travails during the Big Dig. I think it's because no one's saying, I'm going to fund whatever it was, 90% of what you're doing out of federal funds. I'm assuming in every one of these areas, please correct me if you think differently, transit, housing, climate, education, if the Congress and Joe Biden said, here is not only that first huge, what was it, $10 billion we gave you, but we're going to fund any of these projects that David Scharfenberg is proposing to the tune of 90%. You don't think our leaders would jump at them?
Sure, I think they would. I mean, you know, let's, in terms of sticking with the local for a moment, I mean, Governor Baker was certainly elected on kind of an incrementalist platform, and he did quite well. You know, he's quite a popular governor. That's what the voters wanted. But that's certainly at least a factor here locally. But Jim, I think your central point is absolutely right. I mean, a lot of this money would have to come from the feds, and that's a big ask. But I think it's easy to forget how close we got. Build Back Better, President Biden's push, you know, that was a huge package with just the stuff I'm talking about here. Big investments in climate and all sorts of important things in housing. And, you know, we were really close. I mean, this is wildly popular stuff. It's not like there was some big chunk of the Democratic Senate delegation that was opposed to this. We're talking, you know, 48 out of 50 senators who would have pushed this across the line. So, you know, I don't think Democrats are going to get the 2 more votes they need this election or maybe the election after that. But is it possible to imagine a 52 to 48 Democratic advantage, you know, 6, 8, 10 years from now? Sure. And I think there will be a real appetite at that point for some of these investments.
Yep.
I'm not the first one to argue for this, but you know, there's a call these days for kind of a progressivism that builds stuff. I mean, we've long focused on subsidies for rent or healthcare, but it's clear what we need to do now is build things. We need to build lots of new housing we need to build lots of new clean energy projects. That really has to be the future of progressivism, I think. And I think there is some appetite for that.
Well, let's go down the list of your 4 areas. Can we start with transit? What should we be doing? I mean, this is, in all fairness, we do have a Green Line expansion, which was $1 billion plus, and I see the benefits of it about a mile from my house in Union Square. But you talk about not just fixing, but expansion. Fill in some blanks, David.
Yeah, I mean, this is an age-old debate in some ways. Should we focus on repairing what we've got? And that certainly looks pretty good these days, given the trouble we've had lately. Or should we expand? And I think the argument advocates have made rightly for a long time is we need to do both. I spoke with Dan McNichol, who was once a spokesman for the Big Dig, literally wrote the book on the project, a Globe bestseller, I think, as he likes to remind me. But he's a huge public transit advocate these days. And he says, he literally sketched out on a piece of paper for me with some crayon, I think, all the different colors. Imagine a subway system that sent the red line, up through Lexington and beyond. Imagine a new pink line that went down through Brockton and Milton. All these sort of lines extending out to the Route 128 corridor, and maybe a big sort of urban ring that goes around and connects all those lines. I mean, the possibilities there are endless, and that's a solution not just for mobility, but for housing, for housing costs, right? I mean, the central city is just insanely expensive right now. We need to do all sorts of things, which we can discuss in a moment to address that directly. But one thing you can do is improve access to outlying areas that are more affordable, and that does all sorts of things for the economy, et cetera. So that's one big idea we talk about in this section. There's also, talk of high-speed rail, getting trains that, zip us out to Springfield or down to New Bedford a lot more quickly. A commuter rail that runs a lot more frequently and a lot cheaper. Right now, if you're a parent and you live in the suburbs or a blue-collar city outside of Boston, the idea of coming into Boston to work on a commuter rail is not so appealing. What if your kid gets sick and you have to go home midday and there's only 3 trains? That doesn't do you any good. But if you had a commuter rail system that ran a lot more frequently and a lot more cheaply, suddenly that becomes a real option. And it opens up things for the Lynns and Chelseas of the world too, when they have a much better connection to the central city and all the economic benefits that come there.
Well, of course, that leads directly into housing.
Well, can we stay on transit 1 second?
Yep.
So I have one more thing about transit. Can I do one more thing? You mentioned that east-west rail, and I would argue that I don't want to be negative through this whole conversation because I love the concept, what you're advancing here, David Scharfenberg, about thinking big. But the only thing better than having a Speaker of the House from Massachusetts, a la Tip O'Neill, is having a chair of the House Ways and Means Committee like Richie Neal. Well, we had Richie Neal on the radio with us a few months ago, and Margie and I are huge high-speed rail people, and we said to him, can we expect high-speed rail from Boston to Springfield? Now, again, this is the former mayor of Springfield. It's the guy who controls the purse strings in the House for Congress, and his quote, and I think it was almost verbatim, is he laughed and he said, well, higher speed, not high speed. And so is that a reflection of the reality of what one can get through Congress, or is it thinking smallish?
He is an important champion for this project. You've got some state legislators from out there too. And I think importantly, Maura Healey, Governor Baker's been sort of cool on this. He's started to come around. Maura Healey is looking like our next governor, is more enthusiastic. So you do have folks lining up. I think there are some technical challenges with high-speed rail from here to Springfield that might be behind Richie Neal's answer, or at least part of it. I do think he's committed to getting some real money in for that project. But there's similar challenges, of course, with South Coast Rail. It's been discussed for some time. There are real issues here, no doubt about it. But I think starting to think big is step one.
I agree with you. We're talking to David Scharfenberg from the Globe.
So to move on to those housing issues, we know the issues. There's inequity, the high price of housing. You look at younger generations, you think, how could they possibly even break into the market in this area? And we understand that because we are in this area, the underlying problem is that there just isn't enough space. We never see the real estate market really crash here. It might stagnate a bit, but it doesn't crash. So how on earth can you think big and improve the housing issues in this area?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, maybe the signature challenge for the region. I throw out a few ideas here. maybe the biggest and wildest is let's build a new city. I mean, part of our issue here is we need more housing supply. That's one way to bring down the cost of housing. And we've built new cities in this region before. We built Lowell, we built Lawrence. You know, those are literally created out of whole cloth by industrialists, you know, a century ago on the Merrimack. We built the seaport here in Boston, which again has its problems, but
that's affordable
project. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I say that explicitly in the story. You know, that's not what we need. We don't need another seaport. But there are some interesting examples out there. I talked about a place called Columbia, Maryland, which is a planned community outside Baltimore, which was built about 55 years ago or so, with a very explicit aim of racial and socioeconomic integration. The place now is something like, 50% white, 18% African American, 10% Latino, 9% Asian. I might get the exact numbers wrong here, but it's a pretty remarkable mix. They put all the mailboxes kind of on the cul-de-sac together to encourage people to chat with each other every day. They've got these interfaith centers that bring people together. Their economy is doing quite well. Their education system is highly rated. It was voted the best small city in America by Money Magazine a few years ago. It has its flaws like any place, but imagine a place like that. The state could step up, provide some land. Maybe it's Fort Devens, maybe it's something else in the region. Maybe provide some funding for affordable housing and let some imaginative developers have at it. I mean, who wouldn't build something like that in Eastern Massachusetts, given how hot the real estate market is? So there's ways to think big there. And then within the system we've got, I write a bit about a housing development right across from Ruggles in Roxbury. That was a pretty forlorn place, the Whittier Street development. And they used this federal grant money to completely redo this place. It's beautiful now. It's mixed income, which is good. You don't want to concentrate poverty. They've got yoga classes. They've got a new streetscape to kind of make the place a more livable, walkable place. They're providing a walkable connection from Ruggles over to Nubian Square. There's that's a program that's a small fraction of the size of a similar program that existed like during the Clinton years. So that's something the feds have expanded and could expand to say $1 billion a year. That's not a budget breaker in Washington, and make some real things happen there, create some new housing and break up some of our concentrated poverty. I think vouchers are a big part of this too. The housing advocates are looking at a measure that would basically make a voucher an entitlement, join with some of our other leading anti-poverty programs, food stamps, et cetera, and say, look, housing is a right. We're going to make that happen. And let's pair that with a counseling program that says, if you want to stay in the lower income neighborhood you've grown up your whole life, that's fine. But here's some opportunities to move to some better off neighborhoods. We know from some of the research by Raj Chetty, other economists, that poor kids growing up in well-off neighborhoods do much better later in life in terms of their earnings, whether they go to jail or not, whether they're single parents or not. So I think there's some interesting things to be done.
Before we continue on, it occurs to me that you have to have a changing culture of thinking. You have to have the openness. You have to have the leaders, in addition to the money and the big federal paycheck, that can come to create something like this, as was the case with the Big Dig. But have you looked back into what was happening in society around the time of the Big Dig that we actually allowed for something like this to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of that is leadership. When Michael Dukakis was on the tail end of his governorship, and he was very interested in public transit. One of the sneaky things about the Big Dig, and Jim mentioned it earlier, that Green Line extension, was the attachment of all these public transit projects to this big highway project. He worked hard to get that done. Literally, the day before he left office, I think a key member of his administration signed off on some of these projects. And then also, as Jim mentioned earlier, we had Tip O'Neill in Congress. We had some powerful Massachusetts legislators who steered money this way. So I think it's some combination thereof. Leaders in Washington and at the state level who want to get this kind of work done, and some imagination. And hopefully we can do a little work on that latter part.
Too many voters have become incrementalists too, frankly, which is a topic, in my opinion, for another day. One last thing about housing. You also talk about these guaranteed income programs. Most people never heard of guaranteed income until one presidential campaign was rooted in it. We have one in Chelsea where, based on my interviews with leaders there, has been going really well. There's one in Cambridge where preliminarily they're saying the same thing. Are these outliers, or is there broader interest in guaranteed income programs that might provide the funding to allow people to afford decent housing? Are they about to be replicated, or is this a one and done or a two and done kind of thing?
Well, I think there's definitely interest, particularly in some of the bluer, cities in this state and bluer parts of the country. And as we've seen in these last couple of weeks with these Supreme Court rulings that are really fracturing us into two different countries, that kind of local thinking and local governance is only becoming more and more important. It's really where all the action is these days. So you get, a handful more cities in this, the most expensive region in Massachusetts, dabbling in this sort of thing. Yeah, it can make a difference. I mean, the question, of course, is making these things sustainable, going beyond a pilot, having it be something that is regularly funded. That's the challenge. Sure. But again, time to think big. That's a way to address this housing crisis. Give people who can't afford housing more money.
Before we go to climate, by the way, we should say for people who haven't been following this, preliminary research suggests that the vast majority of the money that individual families are getting from these guaranteed income programs are going to necessities like rent, like utilities, like food for their families. So for those who are concerned there's going to be some wild kind of spending that is irresponsible, not only is that belied by history of public assistance programs for the most part, but it's also totally belied by these guaranteed income pilots, so they should be pursued.
So as we were just mentioning, your third issue that you talk about here is climate change and the rising seas. I live in Boston. I always reference a storm. I don't know when it was, maybe 2018 or so at this point, when I'm also a big runner. There was a point at which I could only run so far because the flooding was so significant in parts of Boston that we couldn't get anywhere. It was a preview.
Was that Sandy, or what was that?
It was a winter storm.
Okay, good.
But it was a preview of surely what's to become more regular in this city. Flash forward, there's a park that I now run by in the North End that's gorgeous and beautiful, and not only is it just aesthetically pleasing, but I've realized that it seems to already counter the next major storm that could flood the city. What's happening there in giving us a sign of what we should be doing across the city and the region?
That's right. Yeah, Jared, the storms I think you're referring to, there were actually two back-to-back, one in January and one in March. I write about the March one in my piece. And that was really a wake-up call for Parks Department officials. They were looking at this beautiful park you mentioned, Langone Park in the North End. It's got a couple of ball fields, pool there. Actually, interestingly, was the site of the Great Molasses flood.
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
My niece is obsessed with that, so I now know all about it myself.
Yeah, kind of amazing. A flood to presage this one. So these storms came, these floods that washed over this beloved park, and it was really a wake-up call for these parks officials. And they said, you know what, we can't just do a regular kind of renovation of this place. We've got to retrofit for this age of climate change. And they wound up raising the harbor walk that runs right along the water there, raising the ball fields behind it. They built a second seawall, which is sort of disguised as a bench that you can sit on and look out over the water. You wouldn't even know it was a seawall unless you look closely or got a nice tour like I did of the place. And that is sort of a small token of what we need to be doing in this city. We need to be raising select parks and streets to sort of guard against this flooding. We need to have berms in certain places. There was talk several years ago of a giant gate out in the harbor that would protect the city, and that was sort of dismissed as probably too expensive and putting all of your eggs in one basket. The smart money these days is on lots of small but still expensive accommodations throughout the city that would protect the city against these rising floods. And another important area, which I mentioned sort of in passing in this piece, but is extreme heat. I mean, that is the biggest natural weather killer in this country by far, more than hurricanes, earthquakes, anything like that. And it's only going to get worse. So we also need to be thinking about investments there, green roofs, literally painting roofs white to reflect heat, cool pavement that won't absorb as much heat, more water fountains, more trees, et cetera. This will cost money as well. So again, this is a place for a big federal investment, but this is something we can do on the state level too. A few years ago, Governor Baker proposed a real estate transfer tax that would pour money into this sort of thing. The legislature did not pass it. There's a new version out there that would double that, even beyond what Governor Baker wanted to do, and split the money between affordable housing and climate change. That's the sort of thing a new all-Democratic administration and legislature should be looking at seriously.
And by the way, Governor Baker, we asked him, had a wonderful contorted argument as to why that was not a new tax, so he could support it and not violate his pledge. Before we leave that, either of you remember the great line that I'm going to butcher from Barney Frank, which was something like, this is before the big dig, they're talking about depressing the artery, it'd be cheaper to raise the city, or some such thing. And again, he was prescient.
Yeah.
So let's move on in our remaining few minutes. You have the fourth topic, transit, housing, climate, and the fourth topic you talk about thinking big, or at least bigger, is in education. Could you talk, we either talked to you in the past, or maybe it was Paul Revel, former Secretary of Education, about this Hartford regional magnet thing. Could you describe what that is? And you talk about it in your piece, David Sharp.
Yeah, I think it was me. We discussed this before. It was back in the late 80s, early 90s, some civil rights advocates sued the state of Connecticut and said, look, this is a grossly unequal education system we have here. Low-income kids of color are not getting anything like the education as their suburban white peers, and they won. And I've argued that there is very much ground for such a case here in Massachusetts. Anyhow, this lawsuit led to this pretty remarkable, I think maybe the largest system of integration in the nation right now in the Hartford area. They've got both a Metco-like program, a small Metco-like program that sends Hartford kids to suburban school districts, but they also have this network of about 40 regional magnet schools. Some of them are in the city of Hartford, some are in the suburbs that surround, and they draw together suburban and urban kids into the same classroom. They attract those suburban families with free pre-kindergarten. They have some attractive themes too, aerospace, performing arts, that sort of thing, and they become attractive schools. And we've seen pretty remarkable results there, where some of these kids from Hartford who are in these integrated schools consistently outperform their peers in the regular Hartford public schools. So this is something that exists not too far from us, that is very much doable. And I argue in this latest piece that that's kind of a big, moonshot investment we can make in education, that is integration of education. Maybe it'll take a lawsuit to force the state's hand, or maybe the legislature can take it up on their own. But let's build a network of schools in the region that will draw folks from the city and from the suburbs, and really have kind of broad-based change as opposed to fixing this or that program.
David, you may know, am I not right that what led to education reform in the mid-90s was a lawsuit by, I think, the Mass Teachers Association that was dependent upon one word in the state constitution, which I believe was the word cherish, which is not wildly well defined, but isn't that what paved the way for this massive redistribution of local aid and all that stuff that attempted to equalize funding for schools?
That's exactly right. Yeah, the key elements of the state constitution here are an education clause, which is just what you said, one that requires the state to cherish the schools, and then an equal protection clause that says everyone should be equal under the law. And so if you can show that there's a constitutional right to a good education, which we have, and that we have an unequal system, which we most certainly have, you can win this kind of lawsuit. So it's very much ripe for that sort of thing. And by the way, there's a big lawsuit along these lines happening right now in New Jersey, another one in Minnesota, and I would strongly argue that's something that should be happening here in Massachusetts.
Can we end where we began about what stands in the way of this? I mean, I think all of us agreed that if there was another 90% offer, a la the big dig from the feds, that even the most incremental of politicians would be jumping at the money. The leadership issue that you mentioned to Jarrett a minute ago, and I sort of cynically talked about voters having become incrementalists for the most part. What's the evidence that this is what the public wants? I mean, when you do polling, when I used to run a tax reform group, when you polled on the things that taxes pay for, there was overwhelming support for almost everything, no matter how big the idea was. And then, of course, when you talked about having to pay for it, the support often dissipated, sometimes dramatically. I operate on the assumption that if the public wants it, since so many politicians stand for nothing except re-election, they'd go there. Am I wrong, or what's your sense of this, David Sharp?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the elements of that Build Back Better package are wildly popular. I mean, it's not even close, 30, 40 point margins for, new housing and clean energy. The tax question is another one, but you know who the public likes to tax? The wealthy.
Yeah.
And that's what Build Back Better was built on.
Totally
and
right.
so I think there's very little political downside here for Democrats in certain states. Maybe not for Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and maybe not for Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona. But you get a couple more senators, you know, even if it's 6, 8, 10 years from now. And you're there, I think. I mean, again, this was not a package that, you know, maybe if you put this package before the Senate 10, 20 years ago, you would have had some blue dog Democrats like, I don't know. You had 48 senators, for this, 47 maybe, you know. This is mainstream Democratic politics now. And I do think it's a pretty incremental jump. I'd also argue that parts of this, at least, might be able to win some support from the sort of populist right that's emerging. I mean, Donald Trump unleashed something. He unleashed all kinds of terrible things. But one thing he unleashed was a new kind of conservatism that says, you know, the workers are getting screwed. You know, we need to do something different. We need to build stuff. And that does have some momentum in the GOP now. And there may be elements of this you could get a handful of Republican senators to support sometime down the line.
Well, any day now, Trump's going to have infrastructure week, isn't he? Isn't that
Right,
coming?
exactly.
I think that was, oh no, Joe Biden beat him to it.
That was sort of our internal joke when we were putting this package together. Infrastructure week, yeah.
Hey, David, the series is great. Keep doing it. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks
for having me.
Thank you. We have been speaking with Boston Globe staff writer David Scharfenberg. Again, thank you for joining us. Well, coming up, how can Boston respond to the Supreme Court ruling on abortion? The Boston Foundation's CEO and President Lee Pelton joins us now to discuss how they're shoring up funds to ensure access to reproductive care. You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH.
Part of your community.
You're going to start to see a lot more ways in which GBH News opens the door to our station to make sure that this is a two-way conversation with the public. We're public media, so this makes sense that this is what we're doing. So we'll be in coffee shops, we'll be in libraries, and most importantly, if you have an idea for where you might want GBH News staff to sit down with a particular group of people, write to me.
To contact Annie Schreffler, visit gbhnews.org/contact.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you. And Comcast Business, offering Security Edge, an internet security solution that helps block threats like malware, ransomware, phishing, and botnet attacks across all connected devices. Restrictions apply. ComcastBusiness.com. And Boston Children's Hospital, ranked the nation's #1 children's hospital by U.S. News and World Report, where families from Massachusetts and the world come for answers. BostonChildren's.org/answers.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Bradley, Jared Bowen is sitting in for Marjorie Egan. We are streaming on youtube.com/GBH News. We're joined now by the Boston Foundation CEO and President Lee Pelton. However, whenever Jared is here sitting in for Marjorie, we have to say in his former life he was president of Emerson. Jared went to Emerson, has won awards. And by the way, since I want to be part of this too, my younger daughter graduated from Emerson, a proud Emerson grad. Lee Pelton, it's great to see you.
Good, and you know, all sorts of conflicts of interest.
Beautiful, I love that, don't you?
But you know, I noticed coming in that there is a Jim sandwich.
Yes.
And there's a Marjorie sandwich.
That's correct.
And I'm here to protest.
That there's no Lee sandwich?
No, that there's not a Jared sandwich.
There used to be a Jared. What was your sandwich?
Thank you. It was the spicy Jared, actually.
Oh, I see.
And I will tell you that
You're talking about you or the sandwich?
Both.
Thank you.
As President Pelton
Okay,
knows,
yeah,
I could deliver the spicy.
Yeah,
But
indeed.
during the break, I went over and it was not there.
Okay,
So-
we're gonna rectify that.
Yes,
Quite an
thank
advocate,
you.
Lee Pelton, I'll tell you.
So, well, let's now shift to a very serious matter. That was the Patriot Front group that marched through the city this weekend. Mayor Wu has met, I believe, has just met with police officials and authorities and will be briefing the media shortly on how the city will begin to respond to something like this happening. This is, of course, something that is front and center now at the Boston Foundation, how you deal with inequity and racism. How do you start to process what happened over the weekend with this group marching through?
Well, first of all, there are some unanswered questions, and I haven't kept up with what's going on today. But the first is, how did this happen without our city and police officers, force not involved in this, in this parade or whatever we want to call it. It's not the first time, obviously, that because I think this group is an offshoot of the Vanguard group, and they've been here before. They were on Emerson's campus, in fact, several years ago, about 3 times, where they posted, at least they claimed that, that they did this. They posted racist and anti-Semitic graffiti all over the place. And I remember some years ago when I think it was the happy, whatever.
Super Happy Fun America.
Yeah, and so they marched down to the bandstand in the Common, and the idea was, which I thought was brilliant, was to put a large perimeter around that gathering, so only they could be talking to each other. They do this, all of these groups, to intimidate and to recruit, I believe, by showing incredible force. Why we weren't engaged in this before they actually, assaulted this person on Dartmouth Street and so on is beyond me.
Should we be talking about this? I mean, we had this discussion at the top of the show with our listeners, and I was glad everybody was appropriately appalled by their presence and their cowardice and all that sort of thing. 100 people apparently in this thing. Maybe 20. Philip Martin did brilliant reporting at the Brigham and Women thing when they suggested the doctors, the anti-racism doctors, were killing white people. The Southie Parade, Keep Boston Irish. Maybe a grand total of 150 people in all 3 of these things. Do we help them by talking about them as much as we do?
Yeah, I know. That's, that's a legitimate question. On the other hand, I come down on we have to talk about it.
So do I.
We must. We have to talk about it because it's it's hate and the manifestation of these groups, and so we need to call out the hate, the bigotry, the threats of violence. We have to call it out when we see it.
So what does the city do? And I assume, again, as Jared said, we'll hear more from Mayor Wu, at least preliminarily, after meeting with law enforcement people. She's supposed to meet with Rachel Rollins, U.S. Attorney, today. What do we do, as small as their presence may be, to make people not feel fear, to make them feel that this is a city that is welcoming and embracing of them, rather than a city where they have to be scared to go downtown or scared to go to a parade on St. Patrick's Day? What do we do?
Well, I think what happened here and what happens in a number of these events is that it's emblematic of some larger issues. And the issues here in Boston have to do with race and how we, as a community, think about race, view race, and all of the divisions and complications that that come with that. And so I think it's Kevin Peterson who has suggested that we have a commission on race and race relations in this city, and I would agree with that.
To do what exactly? What does it do?
Well, a lot of this is exposure, and really to let all of us see and understand race relations in this city in a very visible way, shed a bright light on it, and I think that in and of itself is very, very important and can be effective.
What's your understanding of how something like this resonates? And I guess in both ways, both to when they're capitalizing on hate, and we were talking to a caller earlier who I believe it was in Quincy, who found their neighborhood completely flyered with people wanting them, soliciting support for this movement. But also, what does it do, like on a college campus, when it arrives? What does it do to the student population to see that in your own home?
Yeah, well, it's different people will respond to it differently. Some with anger, some with righteous anger, others with fear. But as I said, it's something that should be called out by those in authority and condemned in the highest terms. And I also think that it provides an opportunity for us, certainly me as president at Emerson College, to take a deep look at the broader issues that arise out of these kinds of awful, despicable occasions.
Can we talk about another awful, despicable thing? The Supreme Court ruling on abortion the other day. The Boston Foundation, under your name, or is it over your name, whatever the expression is, you put out an open letter. So let's start. What are you doing? What is the Boston Foundation talking about on the abortion front?
Well, we're doing two things. One is that we provided a list of 3, 4, 5 organizations around reproductive health that folks could provide funding to, and then we set up a health equity reproductive health fund, which seeks to do 3 things. One is to provide a safe haven for Massachusetts residents when it comes to an abortion. Also to provide a safe haven for those coming from the outside into Boston, and providing other kinds of safeguards for folks around reproductive rights and health.
When you read the stories this weekend, I'm smiling because it's so unimaginable that some local officials with power in some of the anti-abortion states are examining whether or not they can prevent a woman from their state crossing a border to go to another state to get what is legal. What's your...
Well, it's really absurd, and but this is the world that we live in. That's very fractured world, and of course, I guess what's now pending on the Hill, Beacon Hill, actually, is legislation that would prevent that from happening.
Codifying some of the things that Governor Baker
exactly,
did by executive order the same day as the ruling.
But let me say this, and we've talked about this as the Boston Foundation. We need to talk about what it means when we say pro-life. Pro-life would mean providing prenatal care to mothers and their children, not yet born. Pro-life would mean providing care, greater care than we have now, for postpartum. It would mean providing and supporting in a very robust way early education for young people. It would provide nationally, or it certainly reduce the cost of child care, which we know is so expensive these days that even middle class folks have a hard time affording it. So that's what pro-life is. Pro-life for women and pro-life for reproductive health and equity. And so we want to talk about pro-life. Let's talk about it in a way that really is meaningful and impactful.
Since I know you listen to the show 3 hours every single day because you have nothing else to do at the Boston Foundation, Marjorie and I decided a couple of weeks ago, after we were chastised by a few listeners, to not use the term anymore, because I think it was Marjorie made the point, if the people who applauded the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade were pro-life, then they'd be rushing to support Build Back Better, much of which does exactly what you're talking about for families, for young children, all that sort of thing. And to my knowledge, unless either of you know, not one person has said I was against it, but now that abortion has been outlawed, not outlawed, but Roe v. Wade overturned. So you're 100% right, and it's also fantasy land, isn't it?
It is fantasy land. And so what I'm suggesting, I guess what you suggested, the one show that I did miss, is to reframe that phrase.
Can we play something else? Just because my head's going to pop off. I don't know if either of you heard Kristi Noem, who's a possible presidential candidate, governor of South Dakota. She's on with Dana Bash on Sunday, and she is asked about the 10-year-old who got pregnant in Ohio and had to travel to Indiana, which is soon going to make all abortions illegal. Now they have 6 weeks plus or something. Well, it's more than 6 weeks because this kid was 6 weeks and 3 days. Listen to this back and forth between Bash and Governor Noem. It's surreal. Here it is.
In South Dakota, the law today is that the abortions are illegal except to save the life of the mother.
And you would be okay with that, a 10-year-old girl having to have a baby?
No, I'm never okay with that. In fact, that story will keep me up at night. It absolutely
So
will.
would you try to
It
change
breaks
the
my heart. I'm a
law
mother.
to have an
I'm
exception
I'm a
in
grandmother.
a situation like this?
Got a 1-year-old little granddaughter named Miss Addie. I can't even imagine. What I would say is I don't believe a tragic situation should be perpetuated by another tragedy. And so there's more that we've got to do to make sure that we really are living a life that says every life is precious, especially innocent lives that have been shattered like that 10-year-old girl.
I mean, do you believe, I'm sorry, do you believe, how many of these anti-choice senators, for example, have had their mistresses have abortions? This is the biggest fraud ever perpetrated on the American people. And do you believe this gnome, this governor gnome, believes one word of this crap that a 10-year-old should give birth because every life is, it is just, I mean.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I actually saw it. And,
oh, you did? I haven't seen it, I just heard it.
I saw it and fell out of my seat. And it just goes to the, it speaks to what some folks will do for political expediency over valuing life. And it's really remarkable.
Well, how do you see coming into this where we're seeing the arguments now about who can travel where and going after people who have traveled to who may travel to other states once this all kind of gets settled where you can and cannot do what, but not only that, but the providers who treat that care. And this is something you just outlined that you're doing at the Boston Foundation is giving people the financial means to be able to travel. I mean, you're entering into this what seems to be an increasingly murky world here.
It is murky, and it's tyrannical, isn't it? I mean, very much so. And the extent to which folks who support or part of the anti-abortion movement is just beyond description. It's really incredible.
What can, I mean, you mentioned what you're doing there. Can the foundation world across this country even come close to meeting the need? I mean, I think it's wonderful what you are doing, but there's only so much that the philanthropic world can do, no?
No, absolutely. And, there's obviously it's federal and state legislation that are going to guide this in the end, although there are some foundations in the Midwest and other places that have band together to provide similar kind of funds that we've established at TBF to support reproductive rights and reproductive health.
We're talking to Lee Pelton, who's the president and CEO of the Boston Foundation. Can we just, I was going to say, can we discuss one more issue that is where race is front and center, but actually the abortion, Ayanna Pressley called in the day of the decision. I mean, it's front and center there too. It's low-income women, women of color, who are primarily the ones who are going to suffer the most because of this decision, no?
Absolutely, yeah.
I was saying to Jared, I heard a lot of commentary, admittedly on social media, but responsible people on social media, singing the same or touching the same note that was touched after the Buffalo mass murderer was treated, it seemed, at least from the video, with fairly kid gloves, comparing the treatment or the fact that he's alive of the alleged, it's not alleged, this killer out there in Highland Park with compared with Jaylen Walker and who died in was killed in with 60 plus shots from 8 to 10 cops. And the thesis goes, and I subscribe to the thesis, I should say, is yet again another situation where a black guy who everybody admits was unarmed, he had a weapon in the car, it's unclear if he shot it or not, is shot by 8, 10 cops 60 times. And a 21-year-old white man in Highland Park surrenders to the police, and he's well. Is that an unfair distinction to be made?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is we've seen this before, and we're going to see it again until this nation wakes up to the horrific mistreatment and particularly around black men and their killing. And so we're going to see it again. But the other thing I want to remind us that, because you were talking about the mass shooting, is that that's only part of the gun violence issue in this country. As I said the last time I was here, we have a fetish around guns. And the issue with guns is that they're lethal. And that's highly problematic. For people from the age of 1 to 9, the death rate there is greater than the death rate with car accidents. That's greater than cancer. 3,500 young people will die at the hand of a gun this year. That means 12 of them a day. From the time that you begin the show and you end it, someone will die from a gun, either homicide or for young people, a third of those will be around suicide, and the others will be accidental. And nationwide, 45,000 people will die from gun. That's one person every 11 minutes, 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. That is, we are just an incredibly violent nation, and we've got to face that fact and do our best to come to terms with it.
Well, but if we only come to terms, I mean, if Jalen Walker was a white guy, I mean, this is speculative, I assume there'd be a huge national debate about the warfare that was directed at
of course,
this guy. I mean,
there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. And as I said, this is not new. It's happened before. So am I surprised? No. Am I appalled by it? Yes. But surprised? No. And there will be another such incident. And the issue is that we have an amnesia problem in America. These events happen. They raise a lot of consternation and public discourse, and then we forget. It's 10 years since Sandy Hook. 10 years. And we see the same sorts of things happening, and we see the same sorts of killings of unarmed black men happening.
Well, it's escalating to such a degree now. I was really struck by one of the authorities, I think, in Chicago, coming out of Chicago, saying, we're just going to see so much more of this, especially, and I think we even talked about this last time you were here, the copycat nature or the fury that grows out of this, and feeling it gives people license to go out and do this because they've seen the blueprint for it already unfold. I wonder, in hearing you say that, if we get to the point now where we're not going to have a moment to get amnesia because they just keep coming one after the next after the next, and where are we in a society when you can't even go to a 4th of July parade without wondering whether you should be bringing your young child.
Or go to school, or go to the supermarket, or go anywhere.
So listen, what we need to do is limit the access to guns, and limit the access to certain kinds of guns, limit the access to assault weapons, and certainly eliminate the access to these high capacity magazines. We have to do that, and but I'm not holding my breath.
So when we're preparing for you to come here, we're actually preparing for the whole show. Jared, I was saying to Jared, this is going to be so depressing. By 2 o'clock, we're going to need to see our therapists. And Jared said, I have just the thing for you with Lee Pelton. So we're going to spend the last few minutes on look at the smile on Jared's face. It makes Jared very happy.
Well, they're also the people who help us face these issues and address them, but they're the artists. And I was very delighted to see last week when the Boston Foundation announced it's going to be giving quite a bit of money, actually, money that I know from my interaction with artists that can make a huge difference. What are you doing with the grants?
Well, first of all, I should say we're not doing it alone. We're doing it in partnership with the Barr Foundation. And these grants, I think what you're referring to, are Live Arts Boston grants. And these are small grants, $15,000, but they're meaningful grants, which this year Barr and the Boston Foundation gave to 50 artists to help support their work through mentoring and management development and those sorts of things. And for those artists, that $15,000 is really very meaningful. Coaching and other kinds of efforts here to support their work.
I noticed, maybe it surprised me even a little bit to notice how many musicians were on the list, maybe more so than any other particular artist, as opposed to theater or fine arts, all deserving, of course, but music. Do you have a sense of why that was front and center?
No, I don't, but you're right. I think musicians were maybe close to 50% of, and maybe even more than those who received funding. What was also quite remarkable is that about 3/4 of the artists were from the BIPOC community or were associated with organizations that were led by BIPOC folks. So, oh, by the way, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Okay, before you go, let's talk about a human element to this. When you were at President of Emerson, I assume a lot of people screamed at you because you can scream at a president and you don't suffer that much. Is anybody not nice to you now that you're? I'm serious. I'm thinking as Jared is smiling, I'm serious, just smiling ear to ear about these arts grants. And I read down the whole list, and they are spectacular. And those few whom I know, you were so right, that amount of money will make a life-altering, work-altering kind of thing. But how do you know when someone's full of you-know-what when they're being nice to you? I'm serious. Do you have like what is that called? Not a thermometer. What's that called?
Well, you know
what I mean.
As I jokingly said after I took this job, you can't believe how many people want to have lunch with me.
Exactly. That's my point.
Yeah,
and pay
right.
for it, I assume, too.
Exactly. Well, sometimes. but yeah. But, I think, folks come to me with, I think, authenticity and honesty and really, looking for support and help in a variety of ways, not all of which have to do with money, but with ideas and how to connect with this organization or that organization, and or how they can be part of what we're trying to do at TBF.
But you do have I don't know what the word is, I can't come up with it, a truth meter somewhere. By the way, for those who are not watching on YouTube, there's a broad smile on Lee Pelton's face. You know when the BSers are BSing, right? Do you not? Yes, I do, Jim. Yes, I do.
Yes, I do, Jim.
Thank you very much.
It's when he can look behind them and see the bucket that they just want to fill up.
Exactly.
Lee Pelton, it's great to see you as always. We really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. And that's sincere, by the way. I'm really glad to see you. I want to be clear. It's not BS. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have note to self: buy Lee Pelton lunch. Don't expect that he'll pay. We've been speaking with Boston Foundation President and CEO Lee Pelton. Well, coming up, how should environmentalists respond to
Many parents are relieved that their very young children can finally get vaccinated, but plenty of people, including our listeners, still have questions.
Why is it taking long for some of the local health departments as well as children's hospitals to be able to get the right doses?
I'm Elsa Chang, an NPR reporter and medical expert. Answer your vaccine questions this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Today at 4, here on GBH News 89.7.
Support for our programs comes from you. And North Shore Music Theater, Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, adds a few new twists to the makeover story. On stage at Bill Haney's North Shore Music Theater from July 12th through July 24th. nsmt.org. And Newport Mansions, presenting Anything You Want, a closer look at treasures from Newport's Gilded Age. On view now at Rosecliff and included with admission. Learn more at newportmansions.org.
Trusted. Local. News. This is 89.7 WGBH, WGBH HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. Boston's local NPR.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Jared Bowen sitting in for the vacationing Marjorie Egan, and we are streaming on youtube.com/GBH News. Last week, as you know, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled against the Environmental Protection Agency, their ability to, protect the environment, essentially, limiting their power to curb emissions from power plants. How can environmentalists respond to that and other environmental issues? Nathaniel Stinnett of the Environmental Voter Project believes he has the answer. Hello there, Nathaniel. It's good to see you again.
It's great to see you, Jim. Thanks for
being
having
back.
me. Yeah.
So I know we'll let you explain more. I'll try to explain a little bit, but your sense is that to change, to get the needle to move on environmental change, you need to reach the people who really care about it, but they're not voters necessarily. So you would think that somebody who is so passionate about an issue would want to race to the ballot box to be able to vote, but that's not the case. Why, and how do you change that?
Yes, so you're absolutely right. When we think of people who care deeply about the environment, we often assume that they vote all the time, like people who care about guns or reproductive rights or other issues. But environmentalists don't. And you ask why, Jared. A lot of the reason why is for generations, we have viewed environmental activism as being inherently apolitical. So you think of, how do I make a difference? I change what I eat, I change how I get to work, I change the electricity I consume. All of which are important, but like, would you ever hear an NRA member talk like that? It's inherently apolitical, and it's not our fault. It's not environmentalists' fault. It was a very specific, almost generations-long PR campaign by the fossil fuel industry, essentially saying, don't pay attention to this coal-fired power plant behind me. It's all your fault, Jim, for drinking out of a plastic water bottle. Or don't pollute, Jared. It made us feel guilty as though these systemic problems were our personal faults.
So just to be clear for people, you explained this last time when you were here with me and Marjorie, you're not about trying to convince people that the environment matters. You're trying to identify people who know the environment matters and convince them to change their behavior, meaning go vote. That's the underpinning of your organization. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. We live in a moment in time where it's become almost impossible to change people's minds or their opinions. So we're not trying to do that. We're trying to find the people who are already with us and change their behavior.
How do you know this works? I mean, in the abstract, it's a very appealing notion. How do you know that those people are out there, one, and why do you believe that if they're activated, they'll actually go vote and make a difference?
Great questions. So, and you broke it up in the right sort of two ways. So the first step is, how do we find these people? How do we know that we've found environment-first non-voters? What we do is we build predictive models. And I won't get into the weeds here, but these are the ways that presidential campaigns and US Senate campaigns now target voters. Campaigns don't target by broad demographic group anymore. Instead, what they do is they poll tens of thousands of people, combine the poll responses with all this publicly available data, and then they build essentially the same thing that your insurance company builds when they create an actuarial table. So an insurance company wants to predict how long you're going to live, and they use all this data to figure that out. Campaigns use all this data and survey responses to individually identify super environmentalists. Then, we don't need data scientists to figure out which of those environmentalists don't vote. That's public record. You can go to Boston City Hall and figure out which people show up and which don't for particular elections. So we find these non-voting environmentalists. And then the second part of your question, Jim, how do we know that we're getting them to vote? There we run what's called randomized control trials. So let's say we've identified 1 million environmentalists in Florida who have never voted in a midterm. The first thing we do is we randomly set aside about 20% of them in a control group, and we never talk to them. Then the remaining 80%, we text them, we call them, we canvass them, we send them mail and digital ads. Then the election happens, and remember what I just said, whether you vote or not is public record. So we wait about 2 months for voter files to be updated, and not only can we see how big an impact we're having on turnout, but we can also start running experiments to figure out which messages work better than other messages to get these non-voters off the sidelines.
Do you have any evidence that it's turned an election?
Well, we are nonpartisan, and no one knows how someone votes when they go into the polls. But what we do
But you know if there's one candidate who doesn't give a damn about the environment and another candidate who does, and the one who does was trailing or only winning by 5 points and he won by 20 or she won
That's
by
right.
20. Is there any evidence of that working?
Yeah, I mean, in the 2018 midterms, the Georgia 6th Congressional District was won by a Democrat by 3,100 votes. We know from our randomized control trials that we were solely responsible for turning 3,300 non-voters who list climate as their top priority into first-time voters.
Really?
But even more importantly than that, even more importantly than the election-specific results, are the long-term results. Because voting is a potentially habitual behavior, just like exercising or eating healthy. And when we talk to these people, not just in the big sexy elections, but also in the local ones, we turn them into long-term voters who then eventually become habitual voters who really drive policymaking.
I'm wondering how this breaks down demographically. I guess more, I'm wondering how it breaks down by age.
Yeah, so the broad demographic breakdowns, and I need to say this with the enormous caveat of demographic data points are not our most predictive data points, right? You know, oftentimes it's where you shop or what you do on a daily basis that helps us identify these people. But broadly speaking, these super environmentalists are more likely to be people of color than white. They're more likely to make less than $50,000 a year than more. And yes, Jared, they are more likely to be young than old, but that hides a lot of interesting nuance. The truth is, there are plenty of old people, in particular older women, who do list climate and the environment as their top priority. So we're not just talking about 25-year-olds here.
You know, so my thinking, which I assume is not quite that sophisticated, is as horrible as the EPA decision was from the Supreme Court the other day, it's good news for your work, because what the United States Supreme Court is saying is essentially EPA, Congress didn't explicitly say you can do X, so you can't do it. And a lot of us think that this is just the beginning of them essentially defanging virtually every regulatory agency. You're now able to say, there's a question in here, by the way, you're able to now say to people, well, Supreme Court has said all the action is in legislatures because we're not going to let these regulatory agencies make sure we can breathe the air. That is perversely good news for your work, is it not?
I would never call it good news for our work.
But it is good news for your work.
They are essentially admitting what I think many of us have known for a long time, and that is whether you're the Supreme Court, whether you're Congress, whether you're the president, whether you are an anonymous policymaker in the bowels of the federal government, everything is politics. Everything is about whether you have the political power to force policymakers to enact the laws that you want. And yeah, that plays into what we're doing at the Environmental Voter Project. And I would never call it good news, but what we are laser focused on is every single day of the year trying to build that political power, not among non-voters. Non-voters don't determine anything, but among voters.
Is there a particular, I don't know, item, news thing, time, moment such as this that's easier to sway the non-voters? I mean, how do you really, really reach them and change it?
Yeah, well, as we saw during the heyday of the resistance in 2017 and 2018, there is no stronger force in the political universe than negative politics or negative partisanship. We don't like to talk about this, but we all know deep down people like to vote against something. And with Trump not being in office, the progressive movement felt pretty lethargic. They were disappointed about the lack of results that they're getting. And now, with this stream of awful Supreme Court decisions, that is absolutely, and we're already seeing it, getting people really, really riled up. Would I prefer none of this had happened? Of course I would prefer it happened. But people are getting riled up by this stuff, and that does drive voter behavior.
Well, the flip side, if I had to pick the person in the climate movement who I respect more than anybody else, is Bill McKibben, who's regular here. Obviously, he started this with The End of Nature in 1988. And I have to say, he's pretty much, I don't know if he'd like this, but true. I've always found him to be a relentlessly positive person. As horrible as things are going, he finds an avenue to do, whether it's through 350.org or now Third Act, the other organization. He was with me on TV the other night. This is just a part of what Bill had to say in the wake of the Supreme Court decision on the EPA.
In the slightly longer term, it seems to be setting up a situation where the court will deny agencies in general the right to do much regulating. And for the world, and this may be the largest consequence, it undercuts any ability that America has to lead in this fight. The saddest person on the planet today has got to be John Kerry, because I don't have any idea how our international climate envoy goes and talks to the Chinese or the Indians after this.
So, but in all fairness, Bill went on to say, even if Congress isn't the place you go, Wall Street has touch points, that sort of thing. So on one hand, you have the positive energy coming from people who are enraged by the EPA, as we discussed a minute ago, the EPA decision, so they want to vote. On the flip side, you have people like Bill McKibben who went on to say, this is not consequential decision for years, it's a consequential decision for the millennium, is what he went on to say to me. How do you not so depress, not you, so depress an environmental non-voter so that you can overcome him or her saying, well, I haven't voted because it won't make a difference, and now I really know it won't make a difference because everybody's against this, from Manchin to the Republicans to the Supreme Court. What do you say to them?
I think we need to diagnose the underlying problem here.
What is it?
A lack of political power in the climate movement. I mean, it isn't like Joe Biden woke up and all of a sudden loved coal. It isn't like we didn't see what was coming in all of these nomination hearings when we got new Supreme Court justices. At its core, the climate movement doesn't have enough political power to push politicians around. And I hear those words coming out of my mouth. I know, like, progressives don't like to talk about raw
that's
political
how politics
power.
works.
It's how politics works, exactly. And so if you are an environmentalist who is dispirited and thinks, oh, my vote doesn't matter, well, not voting is going to give you even less political power. And I know that's not a sexy bumper sticker, but it is true. It is true. If your problem is a lack of political power, don't start relinquishing the little bit of power you have. And the really good news is, our data at the Environmental Voter Project shows that there are over 11 million already registered voters who list climate and the environment as a top priority who have never voted in a midterm election before. That is earth-changing if we show up.
And how do you implore those non-voting environmentalists to vote when they see President Biden open up offshore drilling?
Yeah, well, first, I look at Biden opening up offshore drilling as like the tale of two poles here, okay? So Biden, heading into the New Hampshire primary back in 2020, famously pledged that there would be no more drilling on federal lands. Fast forward to this fall, March, so this winter, there's an NBC News poll that shows by a 52-point margin, registered voters are more likely to support candidates who expand domestic drilling. And not only that, by a 12-point margin, Democrats are more likely to support candidates who expand drilling. Now, do I think that's good policy? No, I think it is awful policy. But like, Joe Biden's going where the votes are. And that's why he's changing his mind on this stuff. So it's incumbent upon us, not because it's our fault, boy, do I wish Joe Biden would be a better leader on these issues, but what we know is that he's going where the votes are, so it's our job to show up and force these politicians to lead, not because out of the goodness of their heart they want to help the climate. We need to force them to do this because it's good politics.
Okay, but here's another obstacle, and we don't mean to be all negative. Well, I mean to be all negative. Jared doesn't. Those, you say the numbers are turning on domestic drilling, and let me be as polite as I can be. The reason they're turning is because those people are dopes, is because they haven't done any work to see if we were to drill in every offshore location in the world and every inch of federal land, it's not going to bring down your gas prices. In 10 years it might, but it's not now. That's number one. Number two, I don't know if you even saw this survey. Ohio State did a survey the other day, NPR reported on it, where they basically found, here's the good news. I know you're not in the convincing business, but you're at least in the not losing the convinced business. People who are open-minded can be convinced how important environmental wisdom is. That's the good news, that facts matter. The bad news is those facts matter until they hear a contrary view from Fox News or a climate denier and that sort of thing. So how do you not lose your target audience? Again, go back to the beginning. People who have the environment high up on their list of priorities but don't vote. You convince them to vote, but by the time you convince them to vote, they either are bought into this notion that it's going to help bring gas prices down to $4 a gallon, or I heard Sean Hannity say something that this is going to be. How do you keep them convinced, since convincing is not your thing? You know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely. So I think there are two important things to stress here. The first is the number of people who care deeply about climate and the environment is not decreasing. It is steadily increasing.
Oh, really?
Now, that doesn't really exert any political power unless those people are voting consistently. But at the time being, the environmental movement and the broader climate movement doesn't have a persuasion problem, okay? But, more to the point, it is enormously important to appeal to people's values and perceptions of themselves. What a decade, more than a decade of behavioral science tells us is that human beings are not rational animals as much as we are social animals. And if I want to convince you of something, I shouldn't try to rationally get you to agree with me. Instead, I should appeal to you as a brother or a father or a good neighbor or a wise person and try to figure out, okay, what type of person does Jim want to be viewed as, and how can I use that to make sure that he cares about this thing?
Okay, so we only have a minute and a half left. How do you, the one thing we haven't talked about is how do you convey this voting matters thing? Do you do an ad? Do you do one-on-one stuff? How do you reach that non-voting environmentalist?
Yeah, so we have a few different communication channels. We have door-to-door canvassers, we do phone calls, we do direct mail, and we do digital ads, and we also have volunteer written postcards. And as far as the messaging in them, it gets to what I was just saying, Jim. What we do not do is try to rationally convince these people of the importance of their one vote. We know from a generation of behavioral science that doesn't work. Instead, we use these little economics nudges to try to appeal to how people want to be viewed. So we'll say things like, Jared, last time there was an election, 127 people on your block of Main Street turned out to vote. Like just pure...
I've seen those postcards too.
Yeah.
That's very powerful
Yeah,
stuff.
it's just like juvenile peer pressure, but it works.
Yeah.
Or we will remind people, or many people aren't even being reminded, they don't know this to begin with, that whether they vote or not is public record. And the reason that works is that even people who don't vote want to be thought of as good voters. And so if you reveal to them that it's public record, they say, holy moly, I don't want my neighbors to find out I don't vote. These little nudges are things we're able to do because we're not in the persuasion business. We're in the business of finding people who just need their butts out the door on
What's
election
your
day.
website if people want to find out more about what you're doing, Nathaniel Stinnett?
It's environmentalvoter.org.
Environmentalvoter.org. It should be, we hope you're an environmentalvoter.org. That's what the name should be, actually.
or the name should be, if you want to volunteer to get environmentalistovote.org. Yes.
Great. Congratulations on your work. Thanks so much, Nathaniel. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. We've been speaking with Nathaniel Stinnett. He's founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. Coming up, CNN...
Before you say coming up, can I respond to some texters who are correctly savaging me for my language with Lee Pelton? When I did use the term, I said to Lee, when we were talking about that kid in Ohio who had to go to Indiana to get an abortion, I did say a 10-year-old who got pregnant. About a score of texters said, she didn't get pregnant, Jim. She was raped. Language is important. You're 100% right, and I apologize for my stupid use of language. Continue.
All right, as I mentioned, coming up, we will speak with CNN's John King. He's joining us. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
GBH members, you can access a treasure trove of PBS programs online with GBH Passport. GBH Passport is home to thousands of hours of programs. Masterpiece to Nova, American Experience to Antiques Roadshow, newer shows like All Creatures Great and Small, even old favorites like The French Chef. There's something for everyone. Watch as much as you want, as many times as you want. If you're already a member, just register today or become a member and sign up now at gbh.org/passport.
Support for GBH comes from you. And WHYY, presenting the new podcast, March On, The Fight for Pride, about a long-standing pride movement that disbanded amidst controversy and the activists fighting to bring it back. March On, available wherever you get your podcasts. And the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, providing resources and tools to help you navigate the college planning process, including customized plans of savings, loans, and guidance. More information at mefa.org.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Jared Bowen sitting in for Marjorie, who's on vacation. We're joined now on Zoom by John King. John, of course, is CNN's chief national correspondent, host of Inside Politics, weekdays at noon. And if you're watching us, we're streaming on youtube.com/GBH News. You can see that John's new office is much better decked out. He's got his pictures up, his CNN mug in the corner. John, it's looking a hell of a lot better. It's all I can say.
Jim and Jared, it's happy belated 4th, although it's been a tough news cycle. But no, I still have a lot of decorating to do. I need to spend an afternoon in here getting it done.
Yeah, you'll have that soon, I'm sure, John King, yeah.
Well, speaking of the 4th, I know there have been some developments even since we've been on the air this morning. What can you tell us about the shooting in Illinois in Highland Park and the latest that we know?
The local authorities just had a briefing about midway through the last hour. They said 21-year-old suspect's in custody. They said they were, quote, having discussions with him. They didn't illuminate as to whether those were cooperative discussions. They said that as of now, they think it's a random shooting and that he acted alone. And they think that based on now, they say they have no evidence that it was motivated by race or anti-Semitism, which some had speculated in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. They found the interesting part was that they say that the suspect had pre-planned this for weeks and was dressed in women's clothing as a disguise, climbed up a fire escape to the rooftop, fired more than 70 rounds, then climbed down the fire escape, dropped the rifle, left it at the scene, and walked away, essentially put himself in the crowd in women's clothing of the people running away. They say he walked to his mother's house, which they said was nearby, borrowed her car, the police saying that they don't believe the mother had any indication of what had just happened or what her son had just been involved in, borrowed the mother's car, and they quickly put together the suspect's name. They said that ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, quickly, the rifle they found at the scene, ran the numbers. It was legally purchased by the suspect, so they knew his name. And a business provided video so quickly that they were able to understand to get a face ID, even though the women's clothing. And then they put out an alert. A concerned member of a community in North Chicago called 911 when they thought they saw the vehicle and thought they saw the suspect, and he was arrested there.
John, he's 21, is that correct?
That's correct, about to turn 22.
So does that mean that under the legislation that Biden signed last week, that had he bought the gun after, I don't know what the operative date is for the legislation, that he would have had an enhanced background check before he was able to buy it?
We'd have to have the exact dates. If he was 21, the answer to that would be no. If he bought them before he turned 21, so that's a key point going forward. The police did not give the specific dates of the purchases, Jim. They did say that there was one rifle on the scene. Then when he was arrested, there was another rifle in the car. The one at the scene was described as similar to an AR-15, so it was a high-powered, high-capacity rifle, which is why you hear from the medical professionals and the police at the scene that this, just like Uvalde, some of the victims, horrific. But you raise a key point. A rifle at the scene, rifle in the car. We have to find out that they said they were both legally purchased by him in Illinois. They did not give the dates. They did not say how long he had these. And then the deputy chief said he was subject to having to come back on this one, but he also believed that some handguns had been seized at the apartment where the suspect lived. But at the scene, he had the one rifle on the roof and one in the car.
So, John, up until a couple of weeks ago, whenever we saw something like this, there would be the immediate conversation of how what Washington now needs to do to step in. Of course, we know Washington just passed measures. So does this just stop now? I mean, where do we start to go after we continue to see events like this?
So it's an interesting one, Jared, in the sense that what they did do is landmark. It had been 30 years, 3 decades, just shy of that, since Washington had passed any gun safety legislation. So this is not to demean the significance of that legislation. And even the Democratic sponsors of it, who would like to do a lot more, describe it as a building block, right? Try to build faith in the among Republicans so we can come back and do more later. If your question is from now until November elections, is this Congress going to do anything else on guns? The answer to that, I'd love to be proven wrong, Jared, but the answer to that is no. The election is 4 months from today. Republicans say they went as far as they could get to get enough votes to pass this legislation. the Republicans involved in that. We could canvass them in the next week or so. I'm guessing that the good reporters on Capitol Hill will. The question, and when we get more details of this shooting, to Jim's point about exactly when were these weapons purchased, perhaps that will stir the conversation. But as of today, what members of Congress would say is a horrific thing happened over the weekend or yesterday in Highland Park, Illinois. They have this legislation. It will now be implemented, and in 6 months or a year, we'll have some data to tell us whether it has helped or how much it has helped. I think everyone believes it will help. The question is how much, but do not expect an appetite to do anything else. Now, members, especially of the Illinois delegation, are saying we should go back at assault weapons, we should go back at high-capacity magazines and the like. So there will be efforts. I just think the odds of success for those efforts are dim, if not zero.
John King, I don't believe we spoke to you. We have spoken to you since the incredible testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson last week. And what I found interesting after her testimony was the following, that some members of this committee are twisting themselves into pretzels. I should be careful, because I have a lot of respect for Jamie Raskin, but I saw Congressman Raskin on CNN, and he was asked repeatedly, and I can't remember who it was, it might have been Wolf Blitzer, whoever it was, one of your colleagues, asked him, well, has he committed crimes? Have you demonstrated so far that Donald Trump has committed crimes? And he did everything in his power to say, we don't have the power to prosecute or to convene a grand jury. I'm paraphrasing. That's up to the Department of Justice. You contrast Congressman Raskin with Congresswoman Cheney, who at least appeared to me to not miss an opportunity over the weekend to say, not only could we make criminal referrals, we could make a number of criminal deferrals. So I guess my long-winded question is there a split in the committee as to how they should handle this? Have you proven that Donald Trump has committed crimes issue?
I think it is more the Democrats understanding how Trump uses their political identity to spin all of these developments. Remember, Raskin was part of the second impeachment. Correct. Adam Schiff was part of the first impeachment. They're both on this committee. And so Trump immediately calls them part of the longstanding, never-ending witch hunt on the Democrats, right? That's what Trump says. So the Democrats are very careful to say, we'll leave that up to the Attorney General. I'm not saying there might not be some, there is some debate within the committee. I don't even know if it raises to the level of like big disagreement. There's some debate in the committee about whether Merrick Garland needs you to actually type up a document with the law citations. We believed, whether it's Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, John Doe violated X federal statute at this piece of the statute with this conduct, and to give it to them in writing, or to just lay out these hearings and hope they're taking notes at the Justice Department. There is a debate about that because, again, anybody watching the information, no matter the source of the information, these are people, including Cassidy Hutchinson. I covered the White House for 10 years. She had an eye on everything. I know where her desk was. I know where her office was. I know how that works. She had eyes on everything. And her testimony is corroborated by other documents, other testimony. So for all the people saying, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she's winging it, forget about it. There's a lot of corroboration of what she has. And those who disagree with her are welcome to come in and take issue with her. Raise your hand, take the oath, and take issue with her. But the question is, in the political environment in which this is being pursued, if a committee that is two Republicans and then overwhelmingly Democratic writes up a document, will Donald Trump say witch hunt, witch hunt, witch hunt? And does the committee want to do that, or does the committee want to leave it to the Justice Department? I think that's a TBD. We're going to have 2 more hearings. I think we're going to have 2. We might have more than that, but my information right now is we're going to have 2 more hearings, and then the committee's going to have to make some choices like that, Jim. Do you write it up? Or you could just write a memo, a summary, and not get into all the detail, or you could write a giant document laying it all out like a lawyer and a prosecutor would if you were going to a grand jury.
It seems that even more energy has been infused here since the Hutchinson testimony. I think we're hearing a lot over the weekend that more people are coming forward. I read it as people perhaps in the White House who thought they were just a low-level, air quotes, just a low-level staffer, realize that they suddenly have very valuable observations themselves or insight. How much do you think people coming forward now is going to change what we see from the committee?
Well, in terms of information, I don't know about criminal referrals, Jared, but in terms of information, I do think we are seeing that already. And the committee says part of their challenge now, they say they are getting new and relevant information even at this late stage of their investigation. So their challenge is, how many more committees do you add? How much of this do you bring to the public attention now? How much of it, they're still going to write a final report. Jim's asking me specifically about a criminal referral. The committee is going to write a final report, which in and of itself may be a de facto criminal referral to the Justice Department. You just make sure you put one in the mail. mail, over to Merrick Garland and all of his deputies, or hand deliver them. The committee, from staff members through the members of Congress on the committee, say they are just surprised and overwhelmed with the value of the new information. And again, I can tell you from my 10 years covering the White House, sure, you love to talk to the president. Sure, you call the chief of staff every day or text the chief of staff every day. Now, texting wasn't such a big thing when I covered the White House back in the day. But you get the most information from the worker bees, the assistants, the executive assistants, the people sitting outside, the kids who are sitting in the hallway who see everything that goes by or handle the documents and pass them around. Those are the people that, to your point, Jared, we are told are now saying, I might know something. I might have something. I can corroborate that. I have a little more detail on that. Is it because they've just realized they have that information, or is it because they're inspired by the bravery of Cassidy Hutchinson and say, you know what, actually, I should speak up? I think there's a mix of that.
John, one last question about the Hutchinson testimony is obviously the Fox Newses of the world have gone out of their way to say a Secret Service guy says that, not under oath, of course, that Trump didn't reach for the steering wheel when in the SUV he was in. The guy who, to me, has so far been the wittiest testifier, Eric Hirschman, in the counsel's office, said, actually, that's my handwriting on that note that was held up. It's not her note. And even if they're right in both those cases, at least in the first case, it's a behavioral thing, not a potential criminal thing. On the core testimony that, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of people who are far better lawyers than I, that goes to potential criminality, is the issue about Trump knowing that they were armed, still happy to have them at the rally, still fine sending them up to the Capitol. Correct me if I'm wrong, has any person in a position to know contradicted that testimony, even not under oath, in terms of Trump's behavior with armed supporters?
No.
That's a pretty big deal.
Okay. Donald Trump himself has said he wanted to go to the Capitol. He said that in interviews since then, in other interviews. To your other point, again, I think anyone who has different information, if it's genuinely different information, if somebody's not telling the truth, if any witness is not telling the truth and somebody can prove it, they should go in under oath and give testimony to the committee and any documentation they have to it. To the other point, number one, Mr. Ornato, we'll see if he goes back under oath. He has been before the committee twice before, and committee members say he has a very different, very more pro-Trump recollection of the day than many of his colleagues, and that he is a more pro-Trump person. He has every right to be that person, but facts are facts. I would say that he should go back in under oath. If he thinks this is an important point to make, he should go in under oath and clarify it and bring any evidence he has with him. I'd also say this, Jim, an hour after this conversation, if they came to me, you and Jared, and asked us the questions, we would remember some of it differently. Mm-hmm. That's called life, right? That's called life. So if Cassidy Hutchinson wasn't perfect, that doesn't make her not a good witness. It makes her a human being. And again, anyone else who has anything conflicting, they should come in and give it to the committee.
John, you just mentioned that the midterms are 4 months away, which it could be a short amount of time, but in this world it seems like a lifetime away. But as we consider the Supreme Court ruling and the Democrats look at that ruling and what it does mean for November, does this change things?
I don't know the answer to that in a yes or no way, but it could change things. Could more gun violence, 315 mass shootings in 183 days of the year. Does that change your politics? It depends on your views on guns, obviously, and what government should do about it, obviously. But I do think there are some potential abortion, Roe v. Wade, or Dobbs now, as it is. Dobbs is now the law of the land, not Roe v. Wade. Does that motivate Democratic turnout? Does it convince younger people who maybe because of inaction on the climate or inaction on guns were disinclined to vote, saying my vote doesn't matter, they're not going to do anything anyway? Does it motivate them? Or is it another, I think the reason I don't know, or is it another, they haven't acted on climate, they haven't acted on guns, and now this, to hell with politics. Forgive my language, but is that what kicks in? And I think part of the challenge there is it certainly gives Democrats an opportunity to motivate constituencies that are critical to them. The suburbs have been drifting back toward Republicans. Critical for Democrats, absolutely critical in the big Senate races and in many of the targeted House races. I think many people think the House is gone, but my view is keep an open mind and count votes on Election Day. Is it possible the Democrats can use these events as a mobilizing force? Yes. Will they? That is the challenge of the next 4 months. And that is also the source of great frustration among the Democratic Party. Some of this is I always say this, and I'm saying this mostly as a joke. I'm going to get beat up for saying it, but I've been doing this for nearly 40 years, and so much has changed in our politics. The one constant has been the ability of Democrats to assemble in a circular firing squad, and fight amongst each other. There's a lot of frustration being vented at the Biden White House right now. The Biden White House starting to vent it back at members of Congress, saying either learn your lesson and bite your tongue, or why don't you pass some of the things the president has asked you to pass. Democrats get that right now the moment is not good. So there's some infighting and some tension. The question is, can they flip a switch, get their act together from here to November? There are possibilities, but it's a tough year for Democrats. Very tough year.
Well, the one thing I've heard that, John, before we let you go, that to me might be the best news for Democrats, this is not original thinking, but I agree with the thinking, is if Donald Trump can't control himself and decides to declare his candidacy for the presidency prior to the midterms, and the thinking goes, and I want to know if you subscribe to it, that at least a piece of the electorate goes from, or potentially Democratic voting electorate goes from worried about gas prices and related things to worried about Trump being in the White House again, even though he's not formally on the ballot in the midterms. Do you subscribe to that or no?
I think that's a distinct possibility. We have seen when Donald Trump is active and present in politics that, especially I will go back to those suburban voters, people who left the Republican Party because of Donald Trump are now willing to reconsider and maybe think about voting Republican because of inflation, because of dissatisfaction with Biden, because it's their normal DNA and they just left because they didn't think Trump was their place. I think there's certainly a reason to believe that could happen if he suddenly decided, A, I'm running for president, and B, I'm going to be active and ever present. I'm going to be out there doing more and more. We see him some, but we don't see him a lot right now. The people around him, both the political people and especially the legal people, Jim, are saying don't do that, because once you declare yourself a candidate, that has a lot of impact on how you can spend your money and how your money is tracked legally. And so it changes the game in terms of how you can operate politically if you are a declared candidate for president of the United States. It would help get him more attention if that's what he thinks the goal is, but it's potentially costly in a financial way, in another way. And if there's one thing we know is Trump likes to raise money for himself. He doesn't like to share money with others, but you have to account for things and pay for things in different ways if you're a declared candidate for president.
John King, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both. Thank you both. Have a good day.
You too.
Great to see you. We've been talking with CNN's John King. He's chief national correspondent and host of Inside Politics weekdays at noon on CNN. Up next, we'll open up the lines and hear from you about the persistent push from employers to get workers back in the office. Are you buying? Are you doing everything in your power to stay remote? And are you finding you might have more negotiating power in this labor market than you ever had? You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH.
More than 30 million Americans lack health insurance.
The availability of insurance made a difference, not just to how plush the room was, but actually life and death differences.
We're talking about how we got here and where we can go next. Join us for a deep dive into American health insurance. That's next time on The Takeaway from WNYC and PRX.
This afternoon at 2, here on GBH News 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you and Franciscan Children's. As we face a kids' mental health emergency in the U.S., Franciscan Children's provides help for your entire family by phone, online, or in a parental support group. Learn more at franciscanchildrens.org. And Comcast. Xfinity Internet is committed to bringing speeds over a gig to power your devices while fitting your needs and a range of budgets. Learn more at xfinity.com/gig.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jared Bowen in for Marjorie. I'm Jim Brady. Employers keep saying they want their workers to come back to the office. Some say they're insisting, at least in the case of Tesla CEO Elon Musk. You may have heard of him. He comes with the threat of being fired if you don't listen to him. But overall, the labor market, as you know, is tight. Employers might be more worried about replacing those workers who demand to remain hybrid or fully remote or even pretty much fully non-performing. So we're opening it up to you? Are you finding you have more leverage than you did before the pandemic to put your foot down and insist you'll stay remote or demand other things? And maybe more importantly, are you finding that no matter what you do or don't do, as a Globe column headline puts it beautifully, quote, it's almost impossible to get fired from some jobs these days. Give us a call or a text, 877-301-8970. You can also tweet us at BOS Public Radio. Is that the reality, that it's almost impossible to get fired from some jobs these days? This is not just some wild columnist. He quotes a professor at Northeastern at the Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. They, meaning employers, can't afford to lose anybody. Just poor performance is not going to get you fired right now. And they go on. There's another economist that this writer, Scott Kersner, cites that it's almost impossible to get fired. And we want to know, one, is that your experience? And two, are you strategically including that in how you are dealing with your employer, where you once had virtually no power? Does it extend to sort of doing what you want, when you want, if at all? 877-301-8970. Why are you shaking your head?
Well, it's just fascinating to me because I don't think I ever in my entire lifetime recognize a dynamic shift like this one,
Nor
where
have I.
suddenly
Nor
the
have I.
employee has all the power. I was struck by this one quote by Howard Schultz, of course, the Starbucks chief executive, who said that he has been unsuccessful at getting, quote unquote, unsuccessful at getting workers to return. I've pleaded with them. I said, I'll get on my knees. I'll do push-ups. This is the CEO of Starbucks who is completely powerless.
Didn't he come back for that reason, both to deal with the unions and to get people to be comfortable with work? By the way, there's another, just so you don't think that was this writer cherry-picked that person from Northeastern. Here's a professor of economics at BU. Firms have to hold on to whatever workers they have. This is, again, this guy, Lynn Toe, saying it, not me. That leaves the worst workers, the low-performing workers, to stay. Essentially, as the headline says, it's almost impossible to get fired from some jobs these days because if you do a little something, it is better than having a vacant position, which is what employer after employer is having to deal with.
And what I keep hearing anecdotally is that when people do leave, they walk into another job where the pay is higher because the market is so scarce right now. So I think that employers are starting to recognize this too, and they can't let people walk out the door, and therefore they're powerless to demand that they come back into the office.
Well, I don't know if it was this story or another story we're reading. And by the way, we'll get to your calls and texts in a minute, 877-301-8970 in a second. We hear these tons of stories where people are doing interviews and the potential employee says right away, I want to work remotely 100% of the time. And if the employer even blinks, that in some cases we've read, they end the Zoom call, they hang up on the phone, whatever it is. Can someone in that interview say, I not only want to work remotely, I really don't want to work. Is that? But I will fill that space. And it is. You are so right. There's never been a time that I can think of in a lifetime where the individual employee, forget unionized workers, individual employee has as much power as he or she has right now. And it extends to, as these economists say, people doing virtually nothing and knowing that an employer would be unwise to penalize them for doing virtually nothing. It's a beautiful thing.
At the same time, you do see a lot of traffic back on the road, so you have to imagine a lot of people are going back, and maybe they want to.
What are we doing here is the question, by the way.
Well, after this,
exactly.
That's it.
Let's go to Barrington, Rhode Island, where Nikki is on the phone. Welcome to the show, Nikki. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm a little scared to say what I'm about to say. But I'm in an industry, we're a marketing industry, that the competition has been dwindling, so we have a little bit of a monopoly.
Yeah.
So I don't feel as motivated, to get customers, that sort of thing. And on the other end, I work across the country remotely, so I don't have a lot of oversight. So it's a pretty sweet gig, I'm going to say.
Nikki, we were hoping that someone exactly like you and as honest as you would be our first call. So do you feel at all, what's the word? I'm not unethical. Do you feel weird about what you just said or no? Nikki?
Oh, I'm sorry, I lost you.
I'm sorry. Do you feel strange saying and thinking what you just said? I love your honesty, but does it?
No, I don't at all. I mean,
Good.
Work is hard. Life is hard. you know, I feel lucky, and I feel like we're all just trying to get by, and yeah, I don't feel bad about it at
Good.
all.
You're an honest woman. Nikki, thank you very much for the call. We really appreciate it. 877-301-8970. She is who they're talking about. It's almost impossible to get fired from some jobs these days. And she has calculated, and she knows what she can get away with. And, you know, by the way, can I say something? Because it makes it sound like I'm being solely critical of such souls. Workers, for the most part, have been treated so shabbily in this country in every way. It's almost like makeup time. And I'm not defending taking a paycheck and not doing anything. However, if you sort of play it loose on the margins, at least, to try to equalize the equation, which has been grossly unequal for decades, I'm sort of like with Nikki. I was half nodding in agreement.
So work more like 6 hours a day as opposed to 2. That's what you're saying. And work more like 3.5 days a week instead of 5.
Well, by the way, I am.
Or the 7 a lot of people were working.
There's a piece of, at least I understand it. I mean, first of all, we're the luckiest people. I mean, I don't want to sound sappy.
Yes, yeah.
These are like the best jobs on the planet.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I say I'm dying to get to work, I'm not doing something that's drudgery that a lot of other people are forced to do because they have to, you know, because they need to take home a paycheck. In any case, Emily in Medford, you're next on Boston Public Radio. Welcome to the show. Hi.
Hi, Emily.
Oh, yay. Hi, guys. Thank
Hi.
you so much for taking my call.
Thank you.
Long time, many times.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a flip on this because I'm a career coach, and I've been saying for years to tell people to demand what they're worth. So my flip on this is to not try to not get fired, but use this power of the labor market right now to get more benefits, more flex time, whatever it is that's important to you, because it's such an exciting time for labor right now. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice. I'm just so
totally agree.
Excited what's happening with union and what you guys were just saying, how awful workers have been treated for years. And this is the first time in any sort of recent history where employers are realizing they're not just hiring robots.
And does this mean that more often than not that you should go elsewhere to get everything you just talked about, or do you think employees can do that with their current bosses?
Oh, such a great question. Whenever people are thinking of leaving their jobs, I always say, think first if you've gotten everything out of that job that you can. If you've gotten all the benefits, educational benefits, I'm a big fan of. So if you can't get a raise, maybe they'll pay for a certification. You know, and so if once you've gotten everything out of that job and you say there's nowhere else for me to grow, there are no more benefits I can tap into, yes, then go elsewhere. Unless it's a truly toxic environment, but that's a different conversation.
You know, Emily, don't go away. I am so glad you called. How did you describe what you do? What's the term again?
I'm a career coach, I specialize in helping women and moms get back to work and get paid what they're worth, but I work with a bunch of people.
Okay, so in light of the fact that most of those women and moms are not used to having the leverage that you described, that we described, that they have now, are most of them equipped to do that with an employer? You know, one of the things, I've had a lot of employers who say my door is always open, and 99% of them mean it in good faith. But what I often say to them, because I was involved in unions for most of my career, is it's really hard for an individual worker to come to an employer and represent themselves. It's, no matter how benevolent and wonderful an employer is, are most of those people you serve able to do what you say they now have the power to do because of the tightness of the labor market?
Oh, that's such a good question. I was just talking with a client the other day who said, my boss wants me to ask for a raise, but I don't know how to do it or if I should do it.
Exactly.
And I'm like, excuse me?
Exactly. It's hard.
Wait, what?
It's really hard to do.
It's particularly, I hate to be gender biased, but working with a lot of women, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of feelings of not good enough.
Yep.
You know, so you're totally tapped into it, Jim. You've absolutely, it's kind of like also when companies are saying we'll pay for your abortions, it's like, great. Do I want to tell HR about that? But that's a different conversation.
Well, you were great. That is, hey, Emily, call us again. That was great.
Yeah.
That was really terrific. Thank you for your call. It is really hard. I mean, it's really hard to represent yourself. Often, I mean,
it's awful. Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, even if you feel you're entitled to something, you know, now you have much more leverage. So you feel, I assume, more confident than you might have felt otherwise. But even in this setting, it is really hard to ask for something for yourself. I think most people would be much better advocates for their coworker.
Oh, of course.
Or somebody they care about.
Yeah.
You know, that's why unions exist. But I mean, if there's not a union, it's really hard to do that, as Emily But I assume that's why the Emilys of the world exist.
That's
to,
why you're my agent. I don't
What?
know. That's why you're my agent.
I've done pretty well, and I'm still waiting for the 7%, but whatever. Wendy, you're in a car.
I can negotiate that down to 3.
7. Wendy, you're in a car. You're next on Boston Public Radio with Jared Bone and me, Jim Browdy. We're talking about, we were inspired by the piece in the Globe. It's almost impossible to get fired from some jobs these days. Welcome.
Hi, Wendy.
Wendy, hi. Whoa,
It's
Wendy.
Linda.
Oh, Linda. Close enough. I'm sorry. That is,
Close enough.
Boy, that one is not even in the same ballpark. Hi, Linda. I'm sorry. Welcome.
That's okay. My husband is actually in the trades, and he jokes, and we joke about this all the time, that if he got laid off or whatever, decided to leave, he would get 5 jobs next week. He could get 5 jobs next week. No problem. And too long ago, he went into work. He was a couple of minutes late because traffic or whatever. And he's like, nobody's here. And then he looked, and they were having a meeting about being to work on time. And he just laughed, and he was like, well, what are you going to do, fire me? You can't even get people in the door or interview. And so he's like, and he's 62 also. So he's like, you know what? If it's the weather's bad or whatever, he's like, they don't pay me enough to get in there, and I can get another job. So he's and it's not something that he's used to being in that kind of position.
Yeah, by the way, you mentioned your husband's in the trades. The second we took your call, Linda, also known as Wendy, we got a text. Absolutely make up time. I work in the trades, and I've taken great pleasure in watching my young coworkers walk away for sometimes double the pay because the employers won't budge. So, I mean, whether you're 62 or a young person in the building trades, that's the nature of the beast. Linda, thank you for your call. Did you hear the joy in Linda's voice too? And I'm assuming, I should have asked her if her husband, when you've been a powerless worker, which sadly most workers in America are for almost all of their work lives, to wake up one day, and the horror is obviously this is caused by the pandemic, and so no one would wish it on anybody. You wake up from being totally powerless and in most cases treated like garbage, and all of a sudden, like these building trades people, you can stand up to the boss and say, what are you going to do about it? I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's such a hard thing to shake, I would imagine, too, especially as we began saying it at the outset. If you grow up with this culture in America that you've got to work hard all the time and you have to do what the boss says and you don't want to be 1 second late, and then to really throw open the shades and realize, wait, this is what it looks like out there? It's a different kind of
since
life.
you're a crack economist, can you answer your own question from before the show when we were talking about this? With all this power that these workers have and the ability to go from one job to another, how is it that so many millions of jobs are unfilled? That's number one. And number two, since employers are willing to offer more than they ever have before, most of them, two, what are these people living on who have left the workforce because they have more power? What are they living on?
Well, okay, so I guess I have to confess I'm not the crack economist, but this is what I can't understand how and I kind of pay attention to this because I'm fascinated by it. Where are all the people going? Why are there so many jobs? And I haven't seen anything comprehensive. I haven't seen any economists really answer this. I hear great theories that a lot of people have moved, and they've, especially if they're in the Northeast, they move to a part of the country where
they got to pay their rent,
where their money goes a lot further.
Oh, okay.
But you can do that for only so long. But we did the whole series at GBH about the big quit and people really moving into sectors and creating their own businesses, things that really satisfied them personally. So they created jobs that didn't necessarily exist before.
That's a good point. Here's a text from someone who said, please keep me anonymous. Good, I'll say your name at the end. Absolutely do not agree, meaning with what we've said. I feel that managers and employers are constantly, capital letters, dangling the threat of unemployment to leave employees feeling vulnerable and unstable. It's the gotcha game, and employees, including unionized, this person says, are underpaid with an unyielding cap on income and a constant pressure to overperform with little to no accolades and zero prospects of advancement. Wish I could learn the trick to keeping a job just doing just the status quo. So I guess it's not uniform is the bottom line.
Well, I also wonder about the economy and where it's headed and how that changes things. But again, we seem to be in uncharted territory where people say this is a time like no other because you still have consumer goods up and people seem to be spending money. I think that's slowing a little bit, but at the same time, we're talking about being in a recession. When have you ever heard about such viability in the job market when we have a looming recession, if we're not in one already?
Let's squeeze another call in. Catherine in Cohasset, you're on Boston Public Radio. Her name is probably Linda, too. Yeah. Hi, Catherine. What's up?
It's Catherine.
Oh, that's close. Good. We got it this time. What's up?
I'm a management consultant, so I work with senior teams and boards on strategic planning. And the reason that I wanted to speak with you today is that I would like people to also keep in mind that it's best for companies to be humanistic and to serve the common and the public interest. And so I would like to exhort leaders of companies to trust their employees to continue working at home if that is good for them, because we've proven for 2.5 years that that does work and that they can be trusted and that performance does stay high. It's better for the environment. It's better for people's quality of life. It's better for families and friends. And so I would like to encourage not just a shift of power, but a shared power model.
Wow. Catherine, talk about an excellent way to end the show on an up note. That is a beautiful sentiment, and I hope your clients are paying attention. That was pretty great. That was really...
It was invigorating.
That was really quite beautiful, yes.
Well, thank you for listening to another edition of Boston Public Radio. You can keep up with us 24/7 by way of our podcast. Tune in tomorrow for the Atlantic's happiness correspondent, Arthur C. Brooks. We certainly need that today or tomorrow, too. Our crew is Zoe Matthews, Aidan Connolly, Mackenzie Farkas, and Rebecca Tauber. Our engineer is John the Claw Parker. Additional support provided by Gia Orsino. And special thanks to our offsite engineers who keep the studio at the Boston Public Library running. And our executive producer is Jamie Bologna. What's on Greater Boston tonight?
A couple of things. One, we're going to continue the conversation about the Patriot Front because I am obsessed with its presence over the weekend here. And secondly, for the last few weeks, I've ended every show by saying, please don't forget Ukraine. So we're going to talk about Ukraine with two experts. What's going on? It seems it was a particularly brutal weekend, particularly for the Ukrainian fighters this weekend. And secondly, the most troubling thing is I read a lot of articles this weekend about how the universal support in the West, particularly our European allies, is beginning to crack as the economies are beginning to suffer. So is there a point at which the West's unrelenting support for Ukraine, as it should be, starts to fray and Russia wins that one too? So that's all tonight at 7 o'clock on Greater Boston. Jared, you were great. You're in for Marjorie tomorrow, which is to be looked forward to. Marjorie, we miss you. She'll be back soon. So have a wonderful day. I'm Jim Browning.
I'm Jared Bowen.
See you all. Bye.